Chapter 4599. After the three elders finished their discussion with the fifth palatial lord, and after receiving his promise, they chatted for a while before bidding him farewell. Until the fifth palatial lord was the only one left in the study, Zhou Xian continued lurking outside the study, hoping to pry into more secrets. Unfortunately, the fifth palatial lord did not have the habit of talking to himself. After the three elders left, he did not send any messages or give any orders. After sitting in the study for a while, the fifth palatial lord left the study and returned to his chamber to meditate and cultivate. Zhou Xian had no choice but to leave silently. He could no longer obtain any more information from the fifth palatial lord's residence, so he could only head to the fourth palatial lord's residence. The reason why he took such a huge risk to continue prying for information was because the secrets of the Chaos Sea were too attractive to him. An hour later, Zhou Xian entered an invisible state and hid his aura. He found an opportunity to sneak into the mountain where the fourth palatial lord lived. On the mountain peak that spanned 50 kilometers, there were dozens of divine palaces and residences that were arranged in rows. The perimeter defense had returned to normal. The number of sentry posts and patrolling guards was also the same as usual. Zhou Xian circled around the various sentry posts, dodging a few patrolling guards, and gradually approached the depths of the palaces and residences. During this period he paid special attention to the desolate race warriors at the commander and steward level, to see if he could obtain any useful information. Unfortunately, he had been lurking for 2 full days, observing nearly all the commander and steward guards. He had eavesdropped on a lot of information, but he did not obtain any secrets that went deeper than the Chaos Sea. Helpless, he could only secretly approach the fourth palatial lord's residence. He lurked outside the divine palace and silently listened to the happenings in the divine palace. The fourth palatial lord spent most of his time cultivating in his chamber. Only when the stewards and commanders under him reported some information would he head to the study to handle official business. Zhou Xian carefully lurked. After waiting for half a day, he only managed to eavesdrop on some trivial information. Only when the 2 elders suddenly visited in the middle of the night and had a secret meeting with the fourth palatial lord in the study did he perk up. In the spacious and luxurious study, the fourth palace master sat in the armchair at the head of the table, calmly sipping his tea. His eyelids drooped as his gaze fell on the large table. There were 2 exquisite gift boxes on the table. At the same time, they were spatial artifacts that could store things. The square gift box contained several sets of emperor-level materials, which could be used to refine pills and forge artifacts. They were all rare heavenly treasures. The 2 elders stood in front of the fourth palace master and looked at him with fervent eyes, their faces full of smiles. "Fourth hall master, this is a small token of our appreciation. Please accept it." "Fourth palace master, I believe you have already guessed our intentions. This matter concerns our lifelong cultivation. Please help us put in a few good words for us in front of the first palace master." It was obvious that the gift box was sent by the 2 elders so that the fourth palace master could help them persuade the first palace master. There was no doubt that the 2 elders were also on the list of people who were guarding the Xianxia mystic realm. They could not follow the army to the Chaos Sea. The fourth palace master withdrew his gaze from the gift box. He had already clearly seen the heavenly material and earthly treasure in the gift box and estimated its corresponding value. However, his expression did not change. His eyes were still clear and calm. He glanced at the 2 elders. As he lowered his head to drink his tea, he said in a low voice, "Actually, you don't have to bring any gifts when you come to me. For so many years you have been supporting me. You are also the 2 elders that I trust the most. For such an important opportunity, as long as I can help you, I will definitely not decline." When they heard this, the smiles on the 2 elders' faces became even brighter. They quickly nodded and thanked him. "That's great. Thank you, fourth palace master." "I knew it. The fourth palace master values friendship and righteousness. He will definitely not sit by and do nothing." However, the fourth palace master waved his hand and continued, "Don't think that things are so simple. I can help you. However, have you considered it carefully? Do you really have to go to the Chaos Sea? Don't just focus on the ancient legend and think that you have a chance to become a god emperor by entering the Chaos Sea. Have you forgotten the lessons of the past? The 9 elders and tens of thousands of elite divine kings who have already passed away. How did they die so tragically? Do you still need me to help you recall? Don't be blinded by that faint hope. Going to the Chaos Sea is not a sightseeing tour. That is gambling with your life. After hearing the fourth palace master's words, the smiles on the two elders' faces disappeared. Their expressions also became much more serious. However, after a moment of silence, the two of them still did not give up on the idea. Their beliefs were still firm. Fourth palace master, of course we know what you are talking about. However, you also know that the previous few times the temple sent elites into the Chaos Sea, they were all taking risks, exploring and trying. However, it is different this time. The person we are looking for has already appeared. The God Emperor from the foreign race who came from the depths of the starry sky is very likely to be our key. That's right. In the past we would fail and lose so many elites and experts. However, this time it will definitely not happen. We all believe that the God Emperor of the foreign race can help us uncover the truth and bring blessings to the Xianxia temple. It will give us a chance to break through to the Emperor realm. The fourth palace master looked at the two elders seriously. Seeing their determined eyes, he knew that they had made up their minds and would not change their minds. He could only sigh silently and nod. Forget it. Since you are so persistent, I do not want to say anything more. Who will follow the army to the Chaos Sea and who will stay in the Xianxia mystery realm? These are the decisions made by the first palace master. I will find a chance to recommend you to the first palace master. However, I cannot guarantee that the first palace master will change his mind. After a pause, he added two more sentences. In addition, I still want to give you a few words of advice out of personal friendship. In fact, you do not have to be so anxious. You can stay in the mystery realm and wait for news. If we succeed in this mission, we will still have a chance to go in the future and it will be very safe. Hearing the fourth palace master's words, the two elders understood in their hearts. Even if the fourth palace master pleaded with the first palace master and recommended them to go to the Chaos Sea, there was probably no hope. The fourth palace master's words were equivalent to persuading them not to have too much hope. The two elders' eyes suddenly dimmed. They could only bow and say goodbye to the fourth palace master. When the two of them turned and left, the fourth palace master's gaze fell on the table and said, "Take your things away." Seeing that he did not even want to accept the gift box, the two elders were even more worried. They were afraid that the fourth palace master would not help them. Therefore, the two of them hurriedly quickened their pace and left the study without looking back. Chapter 4600. The two elders quickly left the study. The fourth hall master naturally sat on the chair and did not move. It was impossible for him to chase after them and return the two gift boxes. The two elders were guessing his thoughts. How could he not know what the two elders were thinking? There were some things that everyone could only tacitly understand. Anyway, he had said what he needed to say and would do what he needed to do. As for the outcome, it was not something he could control. The study fell into silence. The fourth hall master closed his eyes and rested for a while. After drinking the tea in his cup, he got up and left the study. After a long time, when the fourth hall master returned to the secret chamber to cultivate, Zhou Xian left quietly. Up until now, he had obtained key clues and information from the fifth hall master and the fourth hall master. Next, if he wanted to obtain more information, he would have to approach the first three hall masters. But that was very dangerous. The possibility of exposing his identity was very high. After thinking about it, Zhou Xian decided to leave temporarily and go back to sort out the new information he had obtained. Zhou Xian maintained his invisible state and quietly returned to his residence, without alerting anyone. After he removed his invisible state, he carefully thought about it in the secret chamber and recalled all the information he had collected in the past few days. After a few hours of recollecting and sorting out the messy information, he was able to summarize the messy information. He also verified and compared the conversation between the fourth hall master, the fifth hall master and a few elders. Finally, he figured out the ins and outs of the matter. The Chaos Sea was a mysterious place where opportunities and dangers coexisted. In the past tens of thousands of years, the Xianxia temple had sent elite experts to explore the Chaos Sea many times. According to legend, if a peak divine king entered the Chaos Sea and obtained an opportunity, he would have a chance to break through to the God Emperor realm. Therefore, many elders and peak divine kings of the Xianxia temple fought for the opportunity to explore the Chaos Sea without any regard for their own safety. The previous few explorations of the Chaos Sea caused the Xianxia temple to lose 9 elders and thousands of elite divine kings. As a result, the temple's core strength was empty. Therefore, the Xianxia temple held an elite selection competition to select 3,000 elite divine kings from various halls. It was announced to the public that they would lead 3,000 elite divine kings to carry out a mysterious mission. It was an earth-shattering event. But in reality, these 3,000 elite godly kings might very well be cannon fodder sent to their deaths. Of course, the previous few times the Xianxia temple had failed to explore the Chaos Sea, it was because they had not found the person they were looking for. This time the Xianxia temple roped in a foreign god emperor. After many interactions and various analyses, they concluded that this god emperor was very likely the person they were looking for. Therefore, the Xianxia temple had a great chance of success in exploring the Chaos Sea again. At that time, Xianxia temple would be able to uncover some truths and obtain great benefits. It was precisely because they realized this that the elders thought of ways to follow the army into the Chaos Sea. The matter had been clarified. Next, Zhi Tianxing wanted to investigate what the Chaos Sea was and where it was. Was the god emperor of a foreign race roped in by the Xianxia temple the Shura god emperor? He first combed through Zhou Xian's memories, wanting to search for information related to the Chaos Sea from his soul's memories. But unfortunately, Zhou Xian had been born and raised in the Three Mountains city since he was young. He had almost never been to other halls. This person's strength was not bad, but he did not have the corresponding power and status, and could not come into contact with any secrets. Therefore, Zhi Tianxing spent more than an hour and still could not find any memories related to the Chaos Sea. Therefore, he turned his target to the Deputy Hall Master and 2 elders of the Three Mountains Hall. Benefiting from his powerful strength and outstanding performance, the Deputy Hall Master and the 2 elders valued him very much. He pretended to ask the Deputy Hall Master and the 2 elders questions, and in a roundabout way he probed for information related to the Chaos Sea. This method was indeed effective. The Deputy Hall Master had indeed heard of the legends of the Chaos Sea. He told Zhi Tianxing some legends and took out a jade slip to give to Zhi Tianxing. This jade slip recorded a few legends, one of which was about the Chaos Sea. After Zhi Tianxing thanked the Deputy Hall Master, he took the jade slip back to his residence and quietly read and interpreted it. Not long after, he finished reading the contents of the jade slip and finally had a preliminary understanding of the Chaos Sea. It turned out that the Chaos Sea was on the planet of origin, and it was in the central area of the planet of origin. The terrain of the planet of origin was a little special. If it was spread out and drawn into a circular map, then there would be 2 circles and 2 completely different colors. The outer ring should be green and brown. Those were all mountains and forests. There were endless mountains and plains. The territory occupied by the 4 great temples and a few unknown places were all in the outer circle. The outer circle occupied half of the planet of origin. The other half was the blue inner circle. That was the mysterious Chaos Sea. The Chaos Sea was a sea in the literal sense, but it was not a sea in the conventional sense. The so-called boundless sea was always shrouded in the fog of chaos, hiding too many unknown powers. There was an ancient legend that the Chaos Sea was the birthplace of the planet of origin, and also the source of all power and life. Zhi Tianxing knew that the planet of origin was the origin and starting point of all things in the universe. In that case, the Chaos Sea was the real origin and starting point. It was not difficult to understand. No wonder the elders of the Xianxia temple tried their best to enter the Chaos Sea. It was because the Chaos Sea could nurture all things and contain the most original power, which could create miracles. Zhi Tianxing would not be surprised if the Chaos Sea was related to the heavenly Tao and could make people immortal, let alone the peak divine king breaking through to the God Emperor realm. After figuring out the location and meaning of the Chaos Sea, Zhi Tianxing was full of expectations for the Xianxia temple's action plan. He also wanted to take this opportunity to see the Chaos Sea with his own eyes and see what the Xianxia temple was going to do. After solving the first question, Zhi Tianxing started to solve the second question. He analyzed the clues and information he had obtained before, trying to deduce the identity of the foreign race god emperor, whether or not he was the Azura god emperor. According to the scattered information he had obtained, he could confirm that the foreign race god emperor had come to the Xianxia mystic realm and met with several temple masters. The Xianxia temple even expressed that they were willing to make the god emperor the 6th temple master. However, both sides were in the stage of observing each other and could not decide on this matter for the time being. Perhaps only after everyone joined forces to explore the Chaos Sea and achieved success could they let down their guard and guard. Ji Tianxing could not find any more clues or evidence that could prove the identity of the foreign race god emperor. Therefore he thought of the Prajna god emperor. The Prajna god emperor had been in seclusion in the distorted time and space to heal her injuries. She had not moved for many years and seemed to be very low-key. When Ji Tianxing flew to the blood flame sacred tree and landed in front of her, she temporarily stopped her cultivation and opened her eyes. Chapter 4601. It had been half a year since the Pan-God Emperor entered the distorted spacetime to recuperate. She had been recuperating under the blood flame sacred tree for more than 20 years, and her injuries had basically stabilized. Although her injuries were still far from fully healed and her strength was still weak. However, she had already recovered 50% of her combat strength, and there was nothing unusual on the surface. She glanced at Ji Tianxing and asked indifferently, "Why are you looking for me?" Ji Tianxing explained the situation and the purpose of his visit in simple words. "I have already snuck into the Shangqing mystic realm and came into contact with the two temple masters of the Shangqing temple. I heard that they have gathered many experts and are about to rush to the Chaos Sea. In addition, they have also met a foreign race god emperor and treated him as the person they have been looking for many years. The Shangqing temple is very confident about this trip to the Chaos Sea. I suspect that the mysterious foreign race god emperor is the Azura god emperor, but I can't be sure, so I can only come to you for help." Although the Pan-God emperor was already mentally prepared and guessed that Ji Tianxing came to her for revenge, he only talked to her about business. However, when she heard Ji Tianxing's words, she still felt a trace of disappointment in her heart. However, she did not show any abnormality and asked expressionlessly, "What is the Chaos Sea? What is the mystery?" "The Chaos Sea is in the central area of the Star of Origin." Ji Tianxing explained the location and importance of the Chaos Sea to the Pan-God Emperor. The Pan-God Emperor immediately understood what he meant and nodded slightly. It seems that the Shangqing Temple's goal is the same as the Kongming Temple's, to find the secret of immortality. Ji Tianxing thought of something and asked, "When you contacted the temple masters of the Kongming Temple, did they mention the Chaos Sea?" The Prajna God Emperor shook his head and explained, "That should be one of their top secrets. At that time I hadn't become the 6th Hall Master yet." Ji Tianxing nodded and said thoughtfully, "In that case we can basically confirm that the alien God Emperor is the Shura God Emperor. However, I still need you to contact him and find out what he's doing." The Prajna God Emperor considered for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Then she took out a communication jade slip. After deliberating for a while, she sent a message to Emperor God Xiao Luo. She had always kept in touch with the other 4 God Emperors. Even though everyone was carrying out different plans and doing different things. However, before they broke off their relationship, they were still allies. It was natural for them to care about each other and ask about each other's recent situation. As for whether the other party would answer or tell the truth, that was hard to say. After the Prajna God Emperor sent the message, she continued to meditate and adjust her breathing, patiently waiting for the Azura God Emperor's reply. Seeing that Ji Tianxing didn't turn around and leave, she asked, "Are you going to stay here and wait for the news?" It was unknown whether the Azura God Emperor would reply or not. If Ji Tianxing waited here, it would be a waste of time. He pointed at the multicolored divine light behind the Prajna God Emperor and explained, "I'm just observing red mist situation. At present it seems that she's recovering well." Humph. The Prajna God Emperor didn't answer. She snorted coldly and said with a bit of coldness, "Red Mist was seriously injured by him and her divine body was destroyed." Now he pretended to be concerned about Red Mist's condition. What a hypocrite. Although the Prajna God Emperor knew that Ji Tianxing said this to ease the relationship between them. But this clumsy method still made her somewhat displeased. The Prajna God Emperor's reaction made Ji Tianxing feel like he was asking for a snub, so he simply turned around and left. He returned to the other side of the blood flame sacred tree and sat down in his designated seat. He then began to cultivate. At this moment, Yun Yao, who had been cultivating in seclusion not far away from him, slowly opened her eyes. Clearly, she had already finished her cultivation and saw the conversation between Ji Tianxing and the Prajna God Emperor. Ji Tianxing sensed this and turned to face Yun Yao with a gentle smile. He used his divine power and secret techniques to check on Yun Yao's condition. Only after seeing that Yun Yao's injuries had already healed and she had returned to her peak condition did he feel at ease. Did you learn anything from your seclusion this time? Ji Tianqing asked. Yun Yao thought for a moment and said with a disappointed expression, with my talent and aptitude, a peak divine king is already my limit. Even if I cultivate in seclusion here for 1,000 or 10,000 years, no matter how much effort and cultivation resources I expend, I still won't be able to break through to the God Emperor level. This is probably the result of fate. After saying this, she sighed deeply and helplessly. There was no other way. If she couldn't break through to the God Emperor level, it would be very difficult for her to help Ji Tianqing deal with the 4 God Emperors. A peak divine king was an invincible existence in the God realm, the Dragon realm, and the various major star regions. However, in front of the planet of origin and the 4 God Emperors, it was nothing. Ji Tianqing frowned and felt a little uncomfortable. He asked, "Is this your own guess or a revelation from comprehending the heavenly Tao?" He hoped that Yun Yao had such a pessimistic thought because she was imagining things. If it was really a revelation from comprehending the heavenly Tao, then it was basically a foregone conclusion. Yun Yao smiled and nodded firmly with clear eyes. She said, "It's a revelation from the heavenly Tao. I comprehended the heavenly Tao when I was comprehending the heavenly Tao and trying to break through to the God Emperor level." Ji Tianqing fell silent and felt a little uncomfortable. However, he knew that Yun Yao was even more depressed, so he hurriedly comforted and enlightened her. If this was the God realm, the heavens would have destined this outcome and I would be powerless to change it. However, there is a chaos sea on the planet of origin. It is recognized by the various temples as the place of origin, a place that defies the heavens and changes one's fate. The peak divine kings of the various temples all want to enter the chaos sea to find opportunities to break through to the God Emperor level. Yao, don't be discouraged. I will soon follow the army of Shangqing Temple into the chaos sea. Don't worry, we will definitely be able to find opportunities then. Not to mention breaking through to the God Emperor level, even immortality is very likely. Indeed, after hearing his words, most of the gloominess in Yun Yao's heart dissipated. The pressure on her lessened a lot. She smiled and nodded. That's good too. At least Cuckoo and I still have a chance. After saying that, she turned to look at the other side of the blood flame sacred tree and said, "Even if the 2 of us can't break through to the God Emperor level, she can still help you and reduce some of the pressure on you." Ji Tianqing naturally knew that the she Yun Yao was talking about was Pan Ruo God Emperor. Ji Ku was the witness and person involved in the past between Kenshin and Pan Ruo God Emperor. He was very clear about it. Ji Ku and Yun Yao talked about everything, so Yun Yao already knew about those past events. Ji Tianqing felt a little awkward and hurriedly explained to Yun Yao, Yao, don't think too much. I just want to use her to help me deal with the 4 God Emperor. She was coerced by me and was forced to cooperate with me." Chapter 4602. Upon hearing Ji Tianqing's explanation, Yun Yao only smiled and waved her hand to interrupt him. "Tianqing, I believe in you." It was only 4 words, but it made Ji Tianqing take back all the words he wanted to say. Saying anything else would be unnecessary. That's right. Yun Yao had always trusted him without reservation. The 2 of them were no longer just husband and wife. They were the closest family members who shared their hearts and souls. Therefore, Ji Tianqing did not explain anything. Filled with gratitude, he opened his arms and hugged Yun Yao. The 2 of them did not speak. They hugged each other quietly, feeling each other's heartbeat and warmth. They felt extremely peaceful and at ease. Of course, Yun Yao's words also reminded Ji Tianqing. Now he was Ji Tianqing, a brand new person with an independent identity. He was no longer anyone's subordinate. Even if Kenshin and the God Emperor had some emotional entanglements back then, that was all in the past. After a long time, the husband and wife separated. Yun Yao continued to cultivate and strengthen her foundation of the divine Tao. No matter how much she cultivated in seclusion, it was impossible for her to break through to the God Emperor realm. However, she would not give up on herself. She had to accumulate as much strength as possible. When she entered the Chaos Sea in the future, if she could obtain any opportunities, she would have a greater chance of breaking through to the God Emperor realm. Ji Tianqing also continued to meditate and cultivate, preparing to condense the 3rd Tao rune. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, another half a month had passed. After a month of seclusion to recuperate, the 3,000 elite god kings from the 74 branches had basically recovered from their injuries. The departure date set by the Shangqing Temple had arrived. Early in the morning, 6 huge divine warships appeared in the sky above the 5 huge peaks, floating motionlessly. These 6 divine warships were all top-grade warships. They were built with the most expensive refining materials and emperor-level refining methods. The leading divine warship was the most sacred and dazzling. At the same time, it was the only emperor-level divine warship. That was the flagship of the Lord of the Great Hall. It had always been one of the strategic equipment of the Xianxia temple and was rarely seen in thousands of years. The other 5 divine warships belonged to the 3rd Hallmaster, the 4th Hallmaster and the 5th Hallmaster. There were also 2 divine warships provided by the Elder Group and the Guard Group. The quality and power of these 5 divine warships were second only to the Lord's divine warship. They were between the Supreme Grade King level and the Imperial level. They were considered half-step Imperial-level divine warships. Obviously, more than 3,000 elite divine kings were about to board the 6 divine ships and leave the Xianxia mystic realm to rush to the Chaos Sea. 4 Hall Masters moving out at the same time? And he even brought 8 elders with him? And they even used 6 of their best battleships. From this, it could be seen that the Xianxia temple was very interested in this trip to the Chaos Sea. How important was this? Of course, till now, it was unknown where the 3,000 elite godly kings were going or what mission they were carrying out. After daybreak, the 8 elders all appeared. They personally hurried to the residences on the various mountains and passed down orders to the elite god kings of the various branches. After receiving the order, the vice hall masters and elders of the various branches hurriedly led the elite god kings under their command. Fly high into the sky, they entered the various divine warships. There were a total of 6 divine warships. Each divine warship had to accommodate 500 elite godly kings. There were also more than 10 vice hall masters and elders of the various branches. The people of the 3 mountain hall were assigned to the divine warships provided by the guard group. They were at the back of the fleet. Xianxia had long ended his seclusion cultivation. He exited the distorted spacetime and waited at his residence. When the Vice Hall Master gave the order, he, like the other elite godly kings, gathered as quickly as possible and flew into the sky to enter the corresponding divine warship. The black divine warship was 10,000 feet long. Its interior was very spacious. There were more than 600 rooms and 2 meeting halls, one big and one small. Every elite godly king was assigned a room to continue cultivating and regulating their breathing. In a short 15 minutes, more than 540 God King experts had gathered in the discussion hall of the divine ship. At this moment, a protector commander appeared with 4 protector commanders. The 540 godly kings hurriedly fell silent. They looked at the guard commander and the others with solemn expressions. The guard commander, who was clad in armor and wielding a sword, said in a dignified tone, "Everyone's efficiency is acceptable. All of you have gathered in 15 minutes. Not a single person is missing. Welcome to the Guardian Warship. This warship is the most powerful divine warship of our guard group. For this mission I will be in charge of the Guardian Warship. I will command everyone to move together. Next we will need to sail for about 2 to 3 months before we reach the target area. After I announce the dismissal, the 13 Vice Hall Masters will stay behind. The rest of you will return to your rooms to rest and be on standby." To put it simply, the Guardian Warship will be controlled and operated by the Guard Commander during the mission. Everyone present was under the control of the Commander of the Guards. After the Guard Commander finished speaking, the 2 Guard Commanders added a few more words. They explained some rules, discipline, and things to take note of during the mission. After the situation was clarified, the Guard Commander announced the dismissal of everyone. Over 500 elite god kings and elders all returned to their rooms and began to meditate and adjust their breathing. Only the 13 Vice Hall Masters stayed behind. They followed the Guard Commander to the small meeting room. There the Guard Commander used a quarter of an hour to instruct the 13 Vice Hall Masters on many matters. As such, the Guardian Warship's authority system was finalized. The Guard Commander held great power. He had 4 Guard Commanders to assist him. He was in charge of the 13 Vice Hall Masters. Under the 13 Vice Hall Masters were the 500 elite godly kings of the various divisions. The 4 levels were interconnected. It was convenient for the overall command and coordination. Xianxia's performance was very low-key. He had an indifferent expression. Just as he and the Prajna God Emperor had expected, the The jade slip that the Prajna god emperor had sent out earlier was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no reply. The Azura god emperor did not reply at all. It was unknown if he had found a powerful backer and did not want to maintain the alliance of the 5 god emperors. Or was it that he had a keen sense and guessed that the Prajna god emperor's situation was strange, so he deliberately did not reply? In any case, Ji Tianqing did not achieve his goal. He felt a little regretful. He stayed in the sealed room. In the dim light, he stood in front of the window and silently observed the situation outside. The Guardian warship was at the end of the fleet. However, it was the first to settle everyone down. After the 500 godly kings had settled down, the other 5 godly warships were still filled with people. Many godly kings were still boarding the ships. Ji Tianqing's gaze looked through the window. He sized up the scene of the 5 godly warships. At this moment, his divine sense suddenly detected a powerful aura passing through the most sacred and dignified battleship at the head of the fleet. Although the aura was fleeting, ordinary godly kings could not detect it. However, Ji Tianqing was very sensitive to the aura of that realm. He was still able to detect it, because that was the aura of a god emperor. Moreover, it gave him a sense of déjà vu. Chapter 4603. It was not strange for a god emperor realm expert to appear in the fleet. The Lord Palace Master, 3rd Palace Master, 4th Palace Master, and 5th Palace Master were going to lead the army and would definitely be in their respective ships. But what caught Ji Tianqing's attention was that the expert's aura that appeared in the Lord Palace Master's flagship seemed a little strange. He was also a God Emperor realm expert, but his aura was slightly different from the other Palace Masters. Just like how he was also a God Emperor, but his divine power aura was different from the God Emperor of the Desolate race. Most importantly, Ji Tianqing vaguely felt that the God Emperor's aura made him feel like he had seen it somewhere before. Could it be him? Ji Tianqing stood in front of the window and looked through it, staring at the flagship of the Lord Palace Master's flagship as he muttered to himself. Although he had always guessed that the foreign race God Emperor who was cooperating with the Xianxia Temple was the Azura God Emperor. But he could not be completely sure until he saw the Azura God Emperor in person. He could not stare at the flagship of the Lord Palace Master for a long time, even if he stayed in the Guardian battleship through the window. An expert like the Lord Palace Master, who was an upper-level God Emperor, would definitely be able to sense his gaze and attention and would definitely notice him. Therefore, Ji Tianqing retracted his gaze and sat cross-legged in the room, silently analyzing and guessing. If the person who entered the flagship of the Lord Palace Master was really the Azura God Emperor, why would he appear at this time? He did not appear before. Could it be that he had been hiding in the Xianxia mystic realm and only the Palace Masters knew of his whereabouts? That should not be the case. Even if he had joined the Xianxia Temple with his cunning and suspicious character, it was impossible for him to trust the Xianxia Temple so much. It is very likely that he came to the Xianxia mystic realm in the past few days and hid his whereabouts. Today, he quietly boarded the flagship of the Lord Palace Master and followed the army to the Chaos Sea. Ji Tianqing secretly analyzed and combined with the Azura God Emperor's character to guess his relationship and situation with the Xianxia Temple. Of course, based on the current situation, even if the Azura God Emperor was in the first Hallmaster's ship, he could only wait patiently for an opportunity. Let alone assassinating the Azura God Emperor, as long as he showed the slightest bit of hostility or revealed any flaws, he would definitely die without a burial place. Led by the first Palace Master, the 4 Palace Masters and the Azura God Emperor were 5 God Emperor level powerhouses. There were also over 3,000 high-level God Kings and 80 peak-level God Kings. All of them would become his enemies. Even if he had great ability, even if he had the help of the Prajna God Emperor and 50,000 loyal and devoted soldiers, it would not be of any use. In short, Ji Tianqing had to endure. First, he had to confirm the identity of the alien race's God Emperor. Then he would observe and understand the Chaos Sea. Finally, he would find an opportunity to deal with the Azura God Emperor. If he could avoid the Xianxia Temple Lords and deal with the Azura God Emperor alone, that would be the best. An hour later, the 3,000 elite God Kings, many deputy palace masters and elders were all in place. The 6 divine warships carried a total of 3,500 God King powerhouses. They left the Xianxia mystic realm and began to fly north. There were more than 500 people in each divine warship. After entering the divine warships, They stayed in their respective rooms and silently cultivated and recuperated. Although they did not know where they were going or what mission they were going to carry out. But everyone had received the news that they would be on the road for more than 2 months. During this period it would be very peaceful and very safe. Most people did not think too much about it. They all obediently cultivated and cultivated. But many people would still whisper and speculate in private. What was the purpose of the Xianxia temple deploying such a large force this time? Why did they have to head north and fly continuously for 2 to 3 months? Where was the northernmost part of the Xianxia temple? What secrets were hidden there? But many god kings did not have high status and status. Their knowledge was also very limited. The existence and meaning of the Chaos Sea was one of the highest secrets to the Xianxia temple. How would ordinary people know? No matter how many god kings discussed, they still could not get to the core of the problem. They did not speak along the way. Time passed quietly. The fleet formed by the 6 divine warships sped across the sky and headed north. Although each divine warship was less than 5,000 miles apart, Xianxia did not dare to take the risk. He released his divine perception and used his divine arts to investigate the other divine warships. As for the Xianxia temple's flagship in the lead, he could not even pay too much attention to it. He simply stayed in his room and did not show his face. He took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime to cultivate in seclusion. The fleet had to travel for 2 to 3 months. It was enough for him to cultivate in the distorted spacetime for another 10 years. Before the battle with the Azura God Emperor, it would naturally be best if he could condense the 3rd Daoist rhyme as soon as possible. At the same time that Xianxia was cultivating in seclusion, the 3,000 god kings in the 6 divine warships were also cultivating in seclusion. Even those deputy hall masters and elders did not benefit from cultivating in seclusion. They still had to put on an act. After all, they did not want to leave the impression that they were lazy and undisciplined to the hall masters. Even the 4 hall masters stayed in the flagship. They closed their eyes and rested, constantly monitoring the movements around them. In the Xianxia temple's flagship of the fleet, there were a few very hidden secret rooms. When the defense array of the secret room was activated, even a god emperor would find it difficult to use his divine perception to spy on the situation. When the fleet set off, in one of the hidden secret rooms, 2 figures stood facing each other and exchanged a few words. Are you prepared for this operation? Of course I am fully prepared and ready to go. You are traveling with us. What about the tens of thousands of soldiers under your command? You don't have to worry about that. I have already made arrangements. Anyway, whether or not I can help the Xianxia temple solve the mystery in the Chaos Sea depends on me. It has nothing to do with the soldiers under my command. Forget it. I don't want to say anything unnecessary. You already know the importance of the Chaos Sea to the Xianxia temple. You also understand how important this operation is to me. I hope that what you said can be realized. Don't disappoint me. Don't worry, Lord Palace Master. According to the situation you described, although I am not 100% sure, I am 70% to 80% confident. That's it then. The secret room has been prepared for you. You can go and rest. If there is anything else, ask the guards to report. We will still meet here to discuss. In that case, I will take my leave for now. 2 tall and majestic figures, both wearing loose black robes, were covered by the dim light, and their faces could not be seen clearly. After a conversation in the dark, the 2 figures left the secret room one after another. Without a doubt. From the conversation between the 2 powerhouses, one of the black-robed figures was the Lord Palace Master of the Xianxia Temple. The other black-robed figure was the God Emperor of a foreign race who cooperated with the Xianxia Temple. Chapter 4604. Time passed day after day. The fleet of the Xianxia Temple flew all the way north, leaving behind only a phantom in the sky. The fleet crossed thousands of mountains and rivers, passing through countless jungles and rivers. Of course, after 2 months of continuous travel, they had crossed the territories of the 19 temples. 2 months later, the fleet left the Xianxia Temple's territory and entered the vast unknown land. The unknown land did not refer to a specific area. It was a primitive area that had not been explored, developed, or built outside the territories of the 4 temples. It could be called an unknown land. The unknown land was very vast. Many of the mountains and jungles were in a primitive state and had existed for hundreds of thousands of years. There were all kinds of dangers hidden in it. Of course, there were also countless ferocious beasts and divine beasts. Most of them had ancient bloodlines and were very powerful. The desolate race members of the Xianxia temple only treated the unknown land as a place to train and explore for treasures. They did not pay much attention to it. The Xianxia temple did not know how many beasts lived in the unknown land. They did not know if they had gained sentience and built kingdoms or factions. After all, in the eyes of the desolate race members, those divine beasts and ferocious beasts were their targets for training, fighting, and hunting. If they encountered a rare, noble, and powerful divine beast, they could capture and tame it as a pet. It was a good choice. When the fleet flew over the unknown land, no one paid attention to the movements in the mountains and jungles below. Even if a few divine king realm beasts discovered the fleet's tracks and showed signs of attacking or being on guard, the guards of the fleet would not care. But Xianxia was different. When the fleet passed through the unknown land, he paid special attention to the situation in the mountains and jungles. Although the fleet would not pass through the core area of the unknown land, it was destined that they would not see any cities or kingdoms. But Xianxia keenly discovered that while most of the beasts were in an uncivilized state, there were still a few beasts that had high intelligence and thought. He even paid careful attention to the reactions of some of the beasts and the traces in the mountains and jungles. He guessed that the beasts in the unknown land were in the process of awakening. After all, many of the beasts had appeared on the Star of Origin before the desolate race and had a longer history. Over the past 100,000 years, all the beast races had been oppressed by the desolate race for a long period of time. They would also gradually evolve in the face of danger and death. Even if they had gained sentience, researched divine abilities, spells, weapons, equipment, and formations, he was still in the ignorant stage of self-exploration. But some of them have already awakened. They had already begun to gather their forces in secret and had begun to resist. Multi-source app. Mimi reading. After half a month of observation, Xianxia came to a conclusion. The beasts of this unknown land are walking the same path as Skysplitter and Revulsion. They had already awakened their intelligence and developed the desire to resist, but they suffered from no one to guide and educate them, so they could only evolve over the long years. If it's necessary, just give them some pointers and enlightenment. Perhaps it will have a miraculous effect. When he was hunted down by the temple masters of Kongming Temple, he had used the beast race reasonably, and with the help of Heaven Splitter and Loathing, he had been able to destroy the Kongming Temple's encirclement. Not only did he save himself from danger, but he also completely escaped the pursuit of the Kongming Temple. He had also gained the friendship of Heaven Splitter, Loathing, and the beast race. Now he was still weak on the planet of origin. Even a cunning fellow like the Azura God Emperor, they would all seek refuge with the Xianxia Temple and seek help. When he dealt with the Azura God Emperor in the future, maybe he would need these beast race. After making up his mind, Xianxia had an idea. The 6 divine warships of the entire fleet were arranged in a straight line. The Lord Temple Master's warship was at the front, followed by the 3rd Temple Master's warship, followed by the 4th Temple Master, the 5th Temple Master, and the Elder Group's warships. The Guardian warship he was on was at the very end of the fleet, and it was also the most inconspicuous one. Therefore he observed for half a day and made sure that the first 5 warships were very calm. In each divine warship, except for the dozen or so divine kings who were piloting the warships and the dozen or so guards in charge of security and defense, the others were cultivating in their rooms. That was to say, if he made a small move at this time, it should not be too easy to be discovered. After finding the right time, Xianxia quietly took out a dozen or so jade slips and prepared to throw them into the unknown lands. In each jade slip, he used the unique language and simple characters of the beast race to record some of the Abhijna cultivation methods and formations that could be popularized. Of course, these Abhijna cultivation methods were not considered top secret, nor were they emperor-level cultivation methods, but there were special imprints and information in them. He used the Abhijna secret method to hide the jade slips one after another, as if they were transparent air, and threw them into the mountains and forests below. After at most 4 to 6 hours, the camouflage that protected the jade slips would slowly dissipate. At that time, the jade slips would emit the aura and waves of divine power, attracting the attention of the beast race. In order to let the dozen or so jade slips spread to a wider area, it might affect more beast race. Xianxia only threw a jade slip into the unknown lands every half a day. In this way, the distance between every 2 jade slips was at least tens of millions of miles. Ji Tianxing was very careful when he did this, and there was no accident at all. The people closest to him and easiest to discover his little tricks were naturally the guard governors, commanders, vice hall masters, and elders of the guard worship. But these people were all high god kings and peak god kings, so they definitely would not discover anything. The god emperor experts who had the chance to discover something were all in the god warships in front of him, tens of thousands of miles away, so they would not notice the guard warship. Thus, Ji Tianxing smoothly carried out his plan and planted a seed in the unknown lands. He could not predict what kind of flower this seed would bloom in the future, or what kind of fruit it would bear. But he firmly believed that even if there was only a sliver of hope, it was better than doing nothing. The fleet sailed through the unknown lands for another half a month. The 2.5-month journey was over. After leaving the unknown lands, the fleet continued north for a day and a night. Then they saw a boundless ocean. At first glance, this ocean looked very ordinary, in line with everyone's imagination of the ocean. There was a flat beach covered in golden sand and a boundless blue sky. The seawater near the sea was relatively shallow and it was light blue. Waves of sea breeze blew over, bringing with it the crisp cries of countless seabirds. It was pleasing to the eye. However, the further north they went, the color of the seawater gradually deepened, and the waves became higher and higher, becoming more and more violent. After sailing above the surface of the sea for 10 days, the situation changed again. Everything that everyone saw was no longer pleasing to the eye. The seawater was so blue that it was black, and the blue sky was covered by layers of gray fog. As for the huge waves on the surface of the sea, they were thousands of feet tall and had the power to move mountains and destroy mountains. Only here did they truly enter the range of the Chaos Sea. Chapter 4605. The Chaos Sea, which was shrouded in chaotic fog, was more than 10,000 feet deep and contained countless dangers. When the fleet of the Shangqing Temple arrived, they did not dare to fly high in the sky. That was because it was an area sealed by the chaotic fog. It was too dangerous. The 6 divine warships could only descend and fly 1,000 feet above the surface of the sea. In this way, when they encountered perilous waves, the dark blue waves that swept across the world would hit the 6 divine warships head-on. The divine warships all activated their defensive arrays and condensed several layers of defensive shields to resist the attack of the waves and unknown dangers. At this moment, the God King experts operating the divine warship were all on high alert. They were completely focused and on their guard. The guards of the divine warships were also on high alert. Even the 3,000 elite godly kings felt the tension in the air and the increasing pressure. They all stopped circulating their energy and regulating their breathing. The temple masters had not given the order to gather the 3,000 elite godly kings. But everyone felt the danger and remained alert, ready to gather and fight at any time. Ji Tianxing also ended his closed-door cultivation and left the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda to return to the room of the divine worship. The solemn atmosphere and severe situation made him realize that the fleet had entered the Chaos Sea. He quietly released his divine sense and probed outside the divine warship to observe the situation outside. Looking at the chaotic fog that covered the sky and the dark blue sea below, he thought to himself, "This is the origin of the Star of Origin, the source of power of all things in the universe, the Chaos Sea? The waves are roaring and the wind is as sharp as knives. This place must be very dangerous. Maybe there are ferocious beasts and sea beasts that were born in the endless deep sea." Ji Tianxing's idea was not far-fetched at all. The Chaos Sea was the source of all power and could give birth to all things in the universe. Then it was not strange that there were ancient creatures born hundreds of thousands of years ago in the endless deep sea. The facts also confirmed his guess. After the fleet sailed for another 2 hours, dozens of water pillars suddenly burst out from the dark blue sea in front of them. Boom, boom, boom. More than 90 black water pillars rose into the sky, connecting the vast sea and the misty sky. So many water pillars formed a huge cage. It enveloped the 6 divine warships that were flying rapidly. Those water pillars were formed from pure divine power. Although they were powerful, they were not a formation after all. The fleet led by the First Hall's flagship was suddenly attacked by an unknown force, yet he was not flustered at all. He continued to move forward calmly. Ping ping ping. The flagship of the first palace master was shining with a dazzling golden light. Was he the first to break through the black water column? It was smashed into pieces. The other divine warships followed closely behind. Passing through the black water that filled the sky, he continued to fly forward. Even if 2 divine warships were hit by more than 20 black water pillars? However, it wasn't a big deal. At most, the defensive light shield protecting the divine warship would tremble violently and let out loud noises. Swish, swish. In the blink of an eye, the 6 divine warships passed through the black water curtain and continued forward. Over 3,000 God King experts? Were they all shocked? His heart was in his throat. Everyone's nerves were tense. Ready to strike? They were ready to assemble and fight at any time. Everyone thought that the fleet had been attacked. Next, there would be an unknown expert or some demon beast that would come to besiege the fleet. Who knew that after the fleet passed through the black water curtain, the sea and the sky returned to calm. Next, the fleet sailed for hundreds of thousands of miles without encountering any danger. This was out of the expectations of all the elite god kings. Everyone was puzzled. They discussed and speculated in private. Could it be that it was not an attack by an expert but a natural danger? At the same time, inside the flagship of the first Hall Master. The first Hall Master had appeared when they left the Xianxia temple for battle. Since then he had been staying in the secret chamber and had never shown his face or given any orders. The mysterious god emperor of a foreign race had been staying in another secret room all this time. After the fleet entered the Chaos Sea, the god emperor also felt the invisible pressure and walked out of the secret chamber. At this moment, the god emperor, who was wearing a black robe and a cloak, was talking to an old man with white hair in the study. This golden-robed old man, who was as strong as a bear and had white hair and beard, was the guard captain of the Xianxia temple. Those who served the Xianxia temple were called guards. They were under the jurisdiction of the guard captain and the governor. Only those who served the hall masters were called guards in front of the hall. There were only a few dozen of them. The guard captain was the head of the guards in front of the hall. He was also the first hall master's personal guard. He was the true confidant of the first hall master. Without a doubt, the guard captain was also a peak god king. The god emperor's aura was cold. He said in a low voice, "Before I came, I heard that the Chaos Sea is the most mysterious and dangerous place on the planet of origin. Although we have not encountered any real danger, I have already felt it." The guard captain stroked his beard and said expressionlessly, "Sixth Hall Master, don't worry. This is only the edge of the Chaos Sea. We have not entered the core area. The most dangerous and exciting things are hidden there." The god emperor had not been conferred the title of Sixth Hall Master by the First Hall Master. However, the two sides were working closely together. As long as nothing unexpected happened, the god emperor would definitely become the Sixth Hall Master after the trip to the Chaos Sea ended. Therefore, the guard captain changed his address in advance. He could also get closer to the god emperor. The god emperor nodded slightly and asked, "I didn't notice just now. What's with those water pillars? Could it be a naturally formed array formation mechanism or trap?" The guard captain shook his head and explained, "There are indeed many naturally formed traps and array formations in the Chaos Sea, such as bottomless pits, huge whirlpools, shattered spaces, ultimate ruins, and so on. There are also many water pillars like the one just now. However, the water pillar cage just now was not naturally formed. It was just a probing attack by some sea beast." The alien race god emperor's interest was piqued and he asked again, "Sea beasts? Ferocious beasts and demons born in the Chaos Sea? Aren't they all ancient living beings?" The guard captain nodded and explained, "The Chaos Sea is the source of all living beings. It's normal for any living beings and demons to be born. Those living beings and demons that were born in the Chaos Sea and grew up in the Chaos Sea are all talented and born gods. Almost all the living beings that we can meet who are willing to move around are at least at the Divine Lord realm. As for the living beings with stronger offensive abilities, they were basically at the Divine King realm. In addition, there are many ancient beasts hiding in the Chaos Sea. Those are basically living beings at the God Emperor realm." The God Emperor was clearly shocked. He asked in disbelief, "You mean, there are many living beings at the God Emperor realm in the Chaos Sea?" The guard captain nodded and said with a solemn expression, "Half of the planet of origin is land and is occupied by the various temples. There are still some unknown places. The other half of the planet of origin is the Chaos Sea. The history of the 4 great temples can be traced back to only a few 100,000 years ago. The legendary ancestor who still exists in the world has only broken through to 100,000 years of lifespan and obtained eternal life. However, the Chaos Sea is different. No one knows how long it has existed. Could be millions of years, tens of millions of years, or even hundreds of millions of years. In such a long period of time, many talented living beings were born. It's not surprising that they grew to the God Emperor realm, right? The God Emperor was enlightened and exclaimed in his heart. Chapter 4606. Before this, the God Emperor had also inquired about the legends of the Chaos Sea. However, the information he knew was limited and one-sided. Now that he heard the captain's explanation, he knew that the secret of the Chaos Sea was so shocking. This also made him think more, and he could not help but worry. If there are many God Emperor realm beings and countless godly king realm demons in the Chaos Sea, then wouldn't they be the most powerful force on the planet of origin, or even in the void of the universe? If that's the case, wouldn't they be able to conquer the other half of the planet of origin at any time and crush the 4 great temples? These thoughts popped into the mind of the foreign race's celestial emperor. He also had more expectations and speculations about the sea beasts and ancient beings in the Chaos Sea. He even started to ponder. Those ancient living beings in the Emperor God realm should have intelligence and could communicate with them, right? The study fell silent. Both of them were silent. The guard captain seemed to have guessed what the foreign race God Emperor was thinking and added a few more words in a calm tone. Although the ancient beings and sea beasts in the Chaos Sea are the most powerful races and forces on the planet of origin. If they want to rule the entire planet of origin, it will be easy. The 4 great temples will not be able to fight back. However, they will not leave the Chaos Sea. The God Emperor's thoughts were cut off on the spot. He turned to look at the captain in shock. Why? The captain explained calmly, those ancient beings and sea beasts rely too much on the Chaos Sea. They are blessed by the heavens and are stronger in the Chaos Sea. Of course, this is only part of the reason. The main reason is that the Chaos Sea is the source of all things, the source of all power, and the place where one can obtain eternal life. The land occupied by the 4 great temples is relatively barren. It is difficult for a godly king to break through to the God Emperor realm, and it is impossible for one to obtain eternal life. After pausing for a moment, the captain smiled and said, for example, the Chaos Sea is a prosperous capital city, and the land occupied by the 4 great temples? It is a barren and desolate mountain village. Why would people who were born and raised in the capital have the idea of conquering a mountain village? On the other hand, the people in the mountain village racked their brains and used all their means. They have to enter the capital city. Such a common metaphor. The outsider God Emperor immediately understood. The guard captain hesitated for a moment. Then he continued, apart from that, based on our previous explorations and our experience with the sea beasts, we've learned a lot about the sea beasts. He analyzed a possibility. Perhaps it was some kind of invisible force? Or perhaps it's the restrictions of the heavenly Tao rules that prevent those ancient creatures and sea beasts from leaving the Chaos Sea. The God Emperor was stunned. He asked, this speculation? Do you have any evidence? How confident are you? The guard captain shook his head. He said, of course there is evidence. But I'm not completely sure. As for the confidence, I still have a 60 to 70% chance. The God Emperor of the other races is not going to discuss this issue, so as not to be overly concerned. This caused the guard captain to misunderstand. He knew very well that the guard captain was the first palace master's most trusted aide. At this moment, the guard captain was discussing these issues with him. In fact, it was equivalent to passing on a message for the Lord Palace Master. So he asked the same question again. Those water columns just now? Is there a sea beast probing our strength? Then why was this emperor's divine sense able to search an area of 100,000 miles? I can't find any traces of the sea beasts. The guard captain had expected him to ask this question. Even not only the God Emperor of the other races, the 3,000 elite godly kings in the fleet found it difficult to understand this question. Thus he explained to the God Emperor of the other races, did I say that before? The Chaos Sea is the birthplace of sea beasts. They are blessed here. In the Chaos Sea, not only do they have an endless source of power, but they can also use the power of the Chaos Sea to increase their combat strength or hide their bodies and auras. Even if they are 50,000 miles away, they can still control a certain area of the Chaos Sea to attack us. Even if they are less than 50,000 miles away from us, they can use the chaos fog or the complicated environment at the bottom of the sea to hide themselves. The god emperor of the other races believed this explanation, but he felt that it did not make sense. No matter how brilliant their concealment methods are, this emperor's strength is above theirs. I should be able to see through them. The guard captain smiled and added, "This is your first time encountering them and you don't have any experience dealing with them. You'll be fine after encountering them a few more times. Just like the other hall masters, they have already found a way to detect their traces. I believe that the hall masters have already noticed the sea beasts that attacked us just now." The god emperor of the other races did not say anything else. He decided to continue observing and deepen his understanding of the chaos sea and the sea beasts. At the same time, inside the Guardian battleship, Xianxia was also thinking about these questions in his room. He could guess that the chaos sea was very dangerous. There were natural array formations, traps and ancient demons. After some analysis, he guessed that the water pillars from before should not be natural traps or array formations. This was because the fleet had turned and circled around several times during the voyage to avoid some seemingly ordinary whirlpools, waves and hurricanes. But in fact, those things that looked ordinary or did not have any appearance were natural dangers. And when they encountered those water pillars, the fleet showed no signs of dodging. From this, it could be seen that it was not a natural danger, but an attack by a mysterious sea beast. Although the fleet did not encounter any more danger after breaking through the water pillar, Xianxia believed that the fleet would definitely be attacked by sea beasts soon. As expected, just an hour later the fleet encountered danger again. This time it was near a huge whirlpool with a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers. The huge whirlpool on the surface of the sea was like a bottomless pit, crazily devouring endless seawater. The suction force in the whirlpool was extremely strong, forming countless tornadoes in the sky. Even the chaotic fog was affected. Although the fleet with a few hall masters should be able to pass through the whirlpool. But to be safe and not cause any trouble, the fleet still chose to take a detour. Just as the 6 divine battleships flew past the whirlpool, something unexpected happened. Hundreds of hurricanes flew out of the whirlpool and smashed toward the 6 divine battleships like mountains. Each white hurricane was 100,000 feet tall and as big as a mountain. It contained spatial divine power that could destroy everything. The 6 divine battleships did not panic when they were suddenly attacked. With the first hall master's ship in the lead, the 6 divine battleships quickly changed positions and arranged themselves in a triangular formation. The various battleships activated their divine arrays and released dazzling divine light. They condensed into thousands of light pillars that shot toward the hurricanes. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, more than 3,000 divine power light pillars slammed into the hundreds of hurricanes, producing a deafening sound. Chapter 4607. The hundreds of hurricanes that came out of the vortex were quickly destroyed by the cannons of the 6 warships. However, this was only the first wave of attacks. Before the hurricanes were destroyed, thousands of water pillars shot out of the vortex. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The ink-blue water pillars rained down like a rain of arrows, covering a radius of 20,000 miles and enveloping the 6 divine warships. At the same time, dozens of huge waves surged out of the ink-blue sea below the fleet. They slammed toward the 6 divine warships like giant palms. At this moment, the fleet, which was being attacked from both above and below, deeply felt the terror of the divine power of heaven and earth. However, this was still not enough to cause any damage to the fleet. Under the control of the many godly kings, the arrays of the 6 divine warships were fully activated, and the power of the defensive shield was increased. Furthermore, each divine warship shot out pillars of light toward the dozens of huge waves. Boom, boom, boom. The multicolored pillars of divine power clashed fiercely with the giant inky blue waves, causing a loud, dull sound to ring out. The huge waves were blasted into pieces and turned into a flood that fell back into the sea. The surface of the sea rippled violently, creating huge waves that were hundreds of feet tall that spread out in all directions. The second wave of attacks was neutralized by the fleet again. However, the sea beast hiding in the dark had clearly expected the fleet's strength. Even though the first 2 waves of attacks were ineffective, they had no intention of retreating. They continued to attack even more fiercely and intensely. From the enormous swirl, countless water arrows, water columns, and colorful lights flew out and poured down like a torrential flood. Tens of thousands of ice blades and frost swords also shot out from the sea around the fleet. They formed a huge array of swords and sabers and attacked the fleet. As a result, the space within a radius of 30,000 miles was sealed and filled with countless sabers and swords. The 6 divine warships formed a battle array and released vast amounts of divine power. They worked together to form a huge defensive shield that defended against the attacks from all directions. Just like that, the two sides entered a stalemate. The water arrows, water pillars, and sabers and swords could not break through the defensive shield of the 6 divine warships. However, the 6 divine warships were mainly for defense. Before they encountered any sea beasts or ancient creatures, they had no intention of counterattacking. At the beginning of the battle, the 3,000 elite godly kings in the 6 divine warships were still a little worried. Their hearts were in their throats. But as time passes, seeing the fleet remain as steady as Mount Tai, since there was no risk, everyone's heart settled back into their stomachs. All the elite godly kings were watching the battle peacefully. Observe carefully how the sea beasts control the Chaos Sea. Launch an attack without showing your face. Xianxia wasn't worried from the very beginning. He had been silently watching the battle. He knew very well that these 6 divine warships were originally Emperor level and half-step Emperor level. Both its defense and power were extremely powerful. Even if it was only those godly kings controlling the divine battleships, there was no need for 3,000 elite divine kings to act. There was no need for the palace masters to make a move. Could also defend against the attacks of the sea beast. What was he looking forward to more? The long-range attacks of the sea beasts were ineffective. The scene when he had no choice but to show himself. He was not the only one. Many elite godly kings and the foreign god emperor wanted to see what the sea beasts that were born and raised in the Chaos Sea looked like. Unknowingly, 15 minutes had passed. How many attacks had the sea beasts launched? What about the overwhelming saber light, sword shadows, water pillars, and water arrows? From the beginning to the end, it never stopped. And a battle formation formed by 6 divine warships? It was never broken through. Other than the dozen or so godly kings controlling each divine warship. They had been busy the entire time, seriously and quickly controlling the array formation. The others were watching the battle and had no intention of helping. Till now, the situation on the battlefield finally changed. Perhaps it was because the attacks that lasted for 15 minutes could not damage the 6 divine warships. The sea beasts hiding in the dark finally could not hold it in anymore. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. First, thousands of waves rose from the surface of the sea around the fleet. More than 3,000 huge black shadows flew out of the ink blue sea. In the blink of an eye, more than 3,600 figures appeared on the surface of the sea. They stepped on the surging waves and formed a battle formation to surround the fleet. Everyone on the 6 divine warships focused their gazes and consciousness on those figures. Everyone finally saw the sea beasts that they had been curious about and looking forward to for a long time. They saw that most of the 3,600 sea beasts were monsters that were 100 feet long. Some were like sharks, some were like bats, and some were like sea snakes. Most of them were as black as ink and flickered with a cold light. There was also a small number of sea beasts that stood on both feet and walked upright like humans. However, their bodies were thin and robust, and their bodies were covered in black scales. Their backs were hunched, and their sharp claws held simple and crude weapons tightly. Seeing this kind of sea beast, Xianxia thought of the sea Xianxias in the mortal world. Of course, these sea beasts were basically divine kings. They were completely different from the Xianxias in the mortal world. The 3,000-plus sea beasts stepped on the waves and surrounded the fleet, but they were not in a hurry to attack. Swish, swish. At this moment, in the chaotic fog above the fleet, there were sounds of something breaking through the air again. Another 3,000 figures crawled out of the thick gray mist and appeared above the fleet. These 3,000-plus sea beasts also had ferocious appearances. Their auras were gloomy and murderous. Most of the sea beasts looked like seagulls or eagles. There were also some sea beasts that looked like pterosaurs. Not only were the two groups of sea beasts obviously different in appearance, even the areas where they usually moved and hid were clearly separated. Most of the sea beasts on the surface of the sea were pitch black and cold. They usually moved under the surface of the sea. Their fighting strength was stronger and they were better at hiding. As for the bird-type sea beasts above the fleet, most of them were covered in gray. They were easier to hide in the chaotic fog. The 3,000-plus elite divine kings on the divine warship did not understand where the 7,000 sea beasts had been hiding. How did they suddenly appear out of thin air? Logically speaking, Everyone should have used their divine senses to search the sea surface and the chaotic fog. Why did they not discover the 7,000 sea beasts earlier? Only the temple masters, grand elder, protector governors, and Tianxing understood that the 7,000 sea beasts had been hiding in the surroundings for a long time. However, they had used their special innate abilities to borrow the power of the chaotic sea and the fog to hide themselves. Unless one was a god-emperor expert or had sufficient experience, it was basically impossible to discover them in advance. With the situation developing to this point, it meant that the 7,000 sea beasts were finally going to attack with all their might and fight the fleet head-on. The 3,000 elite divine kings all became nervous. They all prepared for battle and were on standby at any time. But at this moment, in the giant whirlpool not far away, two figures that blotted out the sky rose up. Chapter 4608. Roar. Chirp. Then a thunderous beast roar rang out. An ink-blue figure that was hundreds of thousands of feet long rose from the giant vortex and flew into the sky. This was a huge ink-blue ice dragon. It was extremely muscular and majestic. Its body that was hundreds of thousands of feet long circled in the chaotic fog in the sky, appearing and disappearing from time to time. Following its appearance, the surrounding tens of thousands of miles was filled with cold air. Even space itself seemed to be on the verge of freezing. It only let out a dragon's roar, but it caused huge waves to surge across tens of thousands of miles. Spatial ripples appeared in the sky. To be able to possess such a terrifying aura, it was undoubtedly a god-emperor level ancient being. Following closely behind the ink-blue ice dragon was a giant divine bird that was 30,000 feet tall and had a wingspan of 50,000 feet. Its entire body was ice blue and crystal clear. One could clearly see the golden divine bones and dark red blood flowing within its body. Its figure was extremely elegant and majestic. There was a hint of nobility in its majesty. Its invisible aura shook heaven and earth. This was an ice phoenix. It was also a god-emperor level being that was born in the primordial era. A dragon and a phoenix, and both were god-emperor level ancient beings, appeared on the battlefield at the same time. It was needless to say how shocked the elite god kings were. At the very least, many of the elite god kings were a little nervous. This was the first time they had seen such a scene in their lives. They could not help but feel a little worried. Only the hall masters, grand elders, protector governors, and Tianxing were able to remain calm and collected. After all, they had already mentally prepared themselves. From the moment the 7,000 god king level sea beasts appeared, everyone knew that a god emperor level ancient being would appear next. Only a god emperor level ancient being could control and command thousands of god king level sea beasts. Tianxing only felt that the appearance of the dragon and phoenix was somewhat interesting. He had already seen divine dragons and phoenixes in the dragon realm and the god realm. He had seen too many of them, especially the dragon race. The divine dragons he had seen were each more majestic and perfect than the last. They were completely in line with the world's imagination of divine dragons. However, the ice dragon in front of him was valiant in size and appearance, but not majestic enough. In terms of appearance, it was definitely not as good as the divine dragons in the dragon realm. In fact, the Chaos Sea was the origin of all things. To put it bluntly, the ice dragon and ice phoenix in front of him could be called the ancestors of many divine dragons and phoenixes. But their appearances were more primitive, more simple. They were not gorgeous or dazzling. On the contrary, the divine dragons and phoenixes in the god realm had evolved more. Even his appearance had become better. Were the 7,000 sea beasts? It was the same logic. There were also many sea beasts in the dragon world, the divine world, the 9 galaxies and the other worlds. They were all descendants of the chaos sea beasts. But the chaos's chaos beasts to chaos their appearances. After there of them two of the to the chaos of to the what? After a long period of evolution, the fusion with other species became even more perfect. Thinking of this, Tianxing could not help but think, what if there are humans in the chaos sea? What would they look like? Would they look more like apes? Or would they look more like birds and beasts? Just as his thoughts were drifting, the ice dragon and ice phoenix spoke. If I'm not wrong, are the worms from the Shangqing temple here to die again? The body of the ice dragon that was hundreds of thousands of feet long was entrenched. It raised its huge dragon head and looked down at the fleet above the sea, speaking in a deep voice. As a dragon, it should have spoken the dragon language. But there were too many types of sea beasts in the Chaos Sea. Over the long years, The fusion of the various races had long produced the same language of the sea beasts. What was surprising was that the language of the sea beasts spoken by the ice dragon was very similar to the common language of the desolate race. There were only some differences in accent and tone, but it did not prevent them from communicating. Everyone in the 6 divine battleships could hear it clearly. No one would notice this detail, but Zhi Tianxing thought of a key problem from this detail. The current common language of the desolate race was definitely to learn and imitate the sea beasts. The reason was simple: the birth of the sea beasts was definitely earlier than the desolate race. It was not an exaggeration to say that the sea beasts were the earliest living creatures in the world, and their language was also the earliest language in the world. Through this point, Zhi Tianxing thought of a deeper problem. When all living creatures stepped into the path of cultivation, be it martial arts, divine Tao, or the final heavenly Tao, they were all in the process of understanding the world and searching for the origin. The closer they were to the origin, the closer they were to the heavenly Tao. In that case, the sea beasts in the Chaos Sea were the closest to the heavenly Tao, and it was not an exaggeration to call them the favorites of the heavenly Tao. This also explained why the Xianxia temple went through so much trouble to enter the Chaos Sea to search for the mystery of immortality. If there is a chance in the future, I must investigate the heavenly Tao and the mystery of immortality from the sea beasts. After analyzing these problems, Zhi Tianxing secretly made up his mind. At this moment, the Ice Phoenix saw that no one in the fleet responded, so she sneered and said sarcastically, "Worms of the Xianxia temple, do you think you are safe hiding in the battleships? Haven't I taught you a few lessons in the past tens of thousands of years? Now you are here to die. Are you tired of living?" As the Ice Phoenix finished speaking, the 7,000 sea beasts around the fleet burst into laughter, and their sarcasm became even more obvious. The elite divine kings in the 6 battleships felt the arrogance and contempt of the sea beasts, and they were furious and ashamed. In their opinion, they were the living creatures that had completely evolved and possessed high intelligence. These ugly, vulgar, and uncivilized sea beasts dared to mock and belittle them, and they deserved to die. However, the 3,000 elite divine kings suppressed their anger and killing intent, and did not dare to act rashly before receiving orders. At the same time, a beam of divine light lit up in the 4th divine battleship, and a figure flew out. That was the 5th Hull Master. He appeared on top of the battleship, wearing a golden divine armor and holding a dark golden sword. He pointed at Ice Dragon and Ice Heart Phoenix and shouted coldly, "Blue Dragon, you Bingxin, back then I severely injured you, but you escaped without a trace. Today the same thing will not happen again, and you will not escape." Then the 3rd and 2nd divine battleships lit up with divine light, and 2 figures appeared. Swoosh, swoosh. The 4th Hull Master and the 3rd Hull Master appeared one after another. They also stood on the divine battleships and looked at the Ice Dragon and the Ice Phoenix with a cold smile and murderous intent. "Long, you Bingxin, you really boast shamelessly. When have you ever sabotaged or obstructed my actions and plans? If only the 2 of you are here today, you will die here." Chapter 4609. In the past tens of thousands of years, Xianxia Temple had come to Chaos Sea several times. Every time, 2 or 3 temple masters led a team of 2,000 to 3,000 King God Realm experts. Long and Yu Bingxin would lead a large group of sea beasts to intercept and fight with Xianxia Temple's fleet. Although the sea beasts could not stop Xianxia Temple's advance after paying a certain price, they could only choose to retreat into Chaos Sea. But every time the 2 sides fought, the people of Xianxia Temple would suffer heavy casualties. The temple masters mentioned that the 9 elders and more than 9,000 King God Realm experts had died in those battles. Although Long and Yu Bingxin's sea beast had suffered more than 10,000 casualties, which was more than Xianxia Temple's losses. Xianxia Temple had spent a lot of time and effort to cultivate those King God Realm experts. The number of King God Realm sea beasts under Long and Yu Bingxin was innumerable. Even if 10 or 20,000 of them were lost, it would not be a big deal. What really determined the outcome of a battle was not the number of King God Realm experts, but the number of God Emperor Realm experts. When Long and Yu Bingxin saw the 3 temple masters, they were already solemn and did not dare to be careless. The 3 temple masters had come in person, a fleet of 6 divine warships, and at least 3,000 King God Realm experts. To Long and Yu Bingxin, this was another fierce battle. However, other than the 3 temple masters, were there any other experts hiding in the fleet? Long and Yu Bingxin looked at each other, and the same thought came to their minds at the same time. So they looked at the warship leading the fleet at the same time. Logically speaking, the leader of this operation should be in the warship leading the operation. The 3 temple masters appeared from the other 3 divine warships. Didn't this mean the leader of this operation was still in the warship leading the fleet and had not shown himself? Lan Long and Yu Bingxin had fought with the temple masters of Shangqing Temple several times. They could recognize that the 3 temple masters in front of them were the 3rd temple master, 4th temple master, and 5th temple master of Shangqing Temple. Which hall master would be in charge of the warship at the head of the fleet? The 1st temple master? Or the 2nd temple master? Thinking of this, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin's eyes became even more solemn as they analyzed the situation. In the past tens of thousands of years, we have fought with the fleets of the Shangqing Divine Palace several times. From the 2nd Hall Master to the 5th Hall Master, we have all fought with them. Only the 1st Hall Master has never appeared. It is said that the identity of the 1st Hall Master of the Shangqing Divine Palace is mysterious. He has always been in the headquarters of the Divine Palace and never leaves. If that's the case, the person in the 1st warship should be the 2nd Palace Master. Damn it, why did the Shangqing Temple send 4 temple lords to act together this time? What are they trying to do? Lan Long and Yu Bingxin realized that the situation was not good and quickly discussed countermeasures. There are at least 4 lords of the Shangqing Temple. I'm afraid it will be difficult to stop them with just the 2 of us. Don't waste any more time. Quickly send a message to Violent Thunder and Jiuing. Let them come and help. After a brief discussion, the 2 ancient divine beasts made up their minds. Yu Bingxin used her innate divine ability to call for help. The 3 temple lords stared at Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Seeing that the 2 of them were no longer as arrogant as before and had become serious and even secretly discussed with each other through voice transmission, the 3 temple lords sneered. However, they still did not give the order to attack. Instead, they attacked Lan Long and Yu Bingxin verbally. Lan Long, Yu Bingxin, I'm not afraid to tell you the truth. The number of people in this operation is more than before. In addition to us 3 temple lords, there is another temple lord. I believe you still remember the experience of the past few battles. This time, the 4 temple lords of the Shangqing Temple are acting together. Naturally, they are determined to win. I advise you not to make unnecessary sacrifices, lest the sea beasts under your command die in vain. The 3 temple lords were very confident. They persuaded and threatened Lan Long and Yu Bingxin to leave. If they could subdue the enemy without fighting, the Shangqing Temple could preserve their strength more completely. Of course, that would be the best. After all, after crossing the territory of Lan Long and Yu Bingxin, the Shangqing Temple's fleet might not be safe. There would be greater danger and crisis. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were silent. They narrowed their eyes and stared coldly at the 3 temple lords and observed the 6 divine warships. They could not be sure if the 3 temple lords were telling the truth. However, based on their experience, they were at least 70% sure that the 3 temple lords were telling the truth. After confirming this, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin felt even more pressure. There was no doubt that the 2 of them and the 7,000 sea beasts could not defeat the 4 temple lords and thousands of elite divine kings. However, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin would not be afraid or retreat because of this. Even if they knew that they were no match for the enemy, they would do their best to stop them. Even if they had to sacrifice the lives of a large number of sea beasts to buy time, they would have to wait for reinforcements to arrive. Worms of the Shangqing Temple, listen up. No matter how many temple lords you have, how many troops you have, and how determined you are to win, this is our territory. This is our territory and outsiders are not allowed to enter. You have only one choice now. Either you leave the Chaos Sea or you fight us to the end. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin roared with murderous intent. They accumulated a vast amount of power and got ready to attack. Since they had already expressed their stand and attitude, the 3 temple lords of the Shangqing Temple felt helpless and could only give the order to attack. We can't waste time with these sea beasts. This is their home ground. If we delay for too long, their reinforcements will definitely arrive. As the saying goes, a long delay may lead to trouble. It's better to end the battle quickly and leave this area as soon as possible. Since Lan Long and Yu Bingxin are so stubborn, there's nothing more to say. Let's fight. The 3 hall masters discussed secretly with each other for a while, then unanimously decided to start the battle. Kill those despicable sea beasts and break out of the encirclement. As the 3 temple lords waved their hands and gave the order, the 6 divine warships went all out, releasing the most violent remarkable skills in sorcery, blasting the sea beasts in all directions. 3,000 elite divine kings who had been waiting for a long time also rushed out of the warships and lined up into 6 teams. They were all shining with divine light as they waved their swords and Kenshin soldiers. They shouted and roared as they used all kinds of remarkable skills and secret skills to attack the surrounding sea beast. Swoosh, swoosh. Suddenly, thousands of remarkable skills lit up and covered the sky, covering a radius of tens of thousands of miles. Endless sword lights, wind, fire, thunder, and all kinds of light pillars rose into the sky like a mushroom cloud, drowning thousands of sea beasts. The 7,000 sea beasts had been in a state of readiness, and their combat strength was at its peak. When the elite divine kings of the Shangqing Temple attacked, they also launched the most ferocious attack under the orders of Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Chapter 46:10. Bang! Boom boom boom. The 6 divine warships and 3,000 elite god kings unleashed countless divine abilities and arts, fiercely clashing with the attacks of the 7,000 sea beasts in the air. The sky-blotting saber glows, sword images, and divine arts all exploded into countless fragments with deafening booms. The incomparably violent impact carried countless fragments of divine light and turned into multicolored shockwaves that spread in all directions. The shockwave was so powerful that it caused massive waves to surge across tens of thousands of li of the sea. Even the massive whirlpool was affected by the battle between the two sides. It was constantly swaying, deforming, and going out of control. The first round of clashes between the two sides quickly ended. No matter how much strength the 6 divine warships and 3,000 elite god kings used, they could not break through the encirclement of the 7,000 sea beasts. Of course, the full-force attacks of the 7,000 sea beasts were also unable to damage the 6 divine warships. The divine abilities and arts used by both sides basically cancelled each other out. Neither side had the upper hand. Even so, once the battle began, it was impossible to stop. Everyone used their full strength and attacked without any regard for their own safety. Ji Tianxing was also mixed in with the 500-some people, casually casting arts and pretending to attack with all his might. The Vice Hall Master and the 2 elders were also supervising the 30-some elite god kings of the 3 mountain hall, urging them to fight with all their might. But Ji Tianxing and the elite god kings only performed mediocre. The Vice Hall Master and the 2 elders could do nothing about it, nor could they criticize them. After all, in a battle of this scale and scale, a few or several hundred elite god kings would not be of much use. What could decide the outcome of this battle was not 3,000 elite god kings or a few dozen peak god kings. Rather, it was several god emperor hall masters. While the 3,000 elite god kings and the 7,000 sea beasts were fighting, the god emperor realm experts of both sides also took action. Swish, 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 swish. 3 hall masters flew into the sky in tacit agreement, entering the chaotic fog to launch fierce attacks on Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. The 4th hall master and the 5th hall master were slightly weaker, so they worked together to deal with Lan Long. The 3rd palace master's strength was relatively strong, so he had to deal with Yu Bingxin alone. Naturally, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin wouldn't back down. Both of them roared and started a fierce battle with the 3 palace masters. The 5 god emperors battled within the chaotic mist, their figures constantly teleporting, flickering, and erupting with 7-colored divine light and bursting forth with waves of powerful divine energy. The battle between them, even if it was just a little bit of the aftershock and impact, was enough to shatter space and collapse heaven and earth. If the regular god kings were too close, they would be injured by the shockwaves. In the best-case scenario, they would lose their battle prowess, while in the worst-case scenario, they would die on the spot. However, the effects of the chaotic fog were extremely powerful. Not only could it help the sea beasts hide their bodies and auras, but it could also block and weaken the divine power shockwaves. Even though the 5 god emperors were fighting in the primal chaos fog to the point where the heavens and earth crumbled and the sun and moon lost their light, it didn't affect the sky and sea beneath the fog. Nearly 90% of the aftershocks of the battle were neutralized by the chaotic fog. Even if there was still a portion of the divine power shockwave that rushed out of the chaotic fog and spread into the sky, it would not cause too many casualties. In short, the battle between the two sides continued in this manner. The 6 divine warships were extremely useful. Not only were they able to suppress the 7,000 sea beasts, they were also able to protect the 3,000 elite god kings on their side. However, the sea beasts were fighting on their home turf, so they had a unique advantage. They were skilled in using the energy and effects of the chaotic sea to their advantage. For this reason, the two sides were in a stalemate, fighting to the death. In reality, the number of casualties was very small. As time passed, an hour had passed. Neither the 7,000 sea beasts nor the 3,000 elite god kings were able to gain the upper hand. Both sides understood that it would be very difficult to determine a victor even if they continued to fight. Thus, everyone focused their attention on the chaotic fog, on the 5 god emperors who were doing their utmost to kill each other. Everyone was looking forward to the outcome of the battle between the 5 emperor gods as soon as possible so that they could change the outcome of the battle. Within the First Hall Lord's worship, the First Hall Lord had not appeared since the start of the battle. He had remained in his secret chamber this entire time. The black-robed and hooded God Emperor had also remained in his room, silently observing the battle. He had no intention of joining the battle. Up until now, his identity and whereabouts had been kept a secret. Only a few Hall Lords knew about it. Unless the First Hall Lord ordered him to join the battle, he would not show himself. He was just a little confused. The Shangqing Temple clearly had the upper hand and could quickly defeat the sea beasts. Why did the First Hall Lord not make a move? Could it be that the First Hall Lord had already discovered that there were more powerful ancient creatures hiding in the dark? Or, the First Hall Lord wanted to wait for Lan Long and Yu Bingxin's reinforcements to arrive before killing them all in one fell swoop? The God Emperor did not ask the First Hall Lord. He could only speculate in his heart. Finally, the situation in the chaotic fog changed. The 3 Hall Lords joined forces to attack Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. They gradually gained the upper hand and took the initiative to suppress Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Even though they could move freely in the chaotic fog and had an endless supply of energy supporting them. But when the 3 Hall Lords joined forces and used the power of the Way of the Heavens and released Daoist rhymes, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were suppressed and forced to retreat. Although they were not injured, their situation was getting more and more passive. The space where they could move and dodge was getting smaller and smaller. At this point, the First Hall Lord, who had been staying in the secret chamber, finally made a move. He did not show himself and remained in the secret chamber. But he raised his hands and released endless divine power. Suddenly, billions of golden divine lights, carrying countless divine Tao nomological laws and wisps of Way of the Heavens, shot out in all directions. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than 80 million golden light blades instantly filled the space within a radius of 50,000 miles. What made people gasp in amazement was that the first palace master's control over the 80 million rays of golden light was flawless. It was perfect. Every golden light blade accurately pierced the sea beasts. Even if they brushed past the 3,000 elite divine kings, they did not cause any harm or threat. In the next moment, the battlefield exploded with a series of boom 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 sounds. At least 2,000 sea beasts were hit by the golden light blades. Their huge bodies exploded into a bloody mist and countless blood droplets. Arg! Heart-wrenching screams and agonized howls of near-death echoed in the sky. Thousands of sea beasts had their bodies destroyed by the golden light blades. Their broken flesh fell into the chaotic sea like dumplings. Instantly, the 20,000 miles of dark blue sea was dyed red by the blood of the sea beasts. This sudden change not only caused 20% of the 7,000 sea beasts to die, but it also caused them to panic and their morale to plummet. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin's hearts jerked, and their expressions became ugly. Chapter 46:11. Although Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were mentally prepared and guessed that there was a temple master in the fleet, they had been wondering why the temple master did not appear and join forces with the other 3 temple masters to deal with them. In that case, no matter how much pressure they were under, they could hold on for a while until reinforcements arrived. However, the temple master did not make a move. He seemed to be very confident in the strength of the other 3 temple masters. It was not until the battle between the two sides was in full swing that Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were held back by the 3 temple masters that the hidden temple master made a move. Moreover, he used such a ruthless killer move that killed nearly 1,000 sea beasts on the spot and severely injured another 1,000 sea beasts. The hidden temple master's use of divine power, divine skills and control of the power of the Way of the Heavens was amazing. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin could not compare. They could imagine how powerful the temple master was. At least he was not like them who were in the middle realm of the God Emperor. He was most likely in the upper realm of the God Emperor. 200 years ago, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin had fought with the Second Temple Master, Third Temple Master and Fourth Temple Master of Shangqing Temple. They were not unfamiliar with the Second Temple Master's divine power and methods. They were almost certain that the Emperor God who had been hiding in the fleet and hadn't shown himself was not the Second Hall Master. Since it was not the Second Temple Master, the answer was obvious. It's the First Temple Master of Shangqing Temple. Damn it! Didn't the First Temple Master of Shangqing Temple claim to never leave the Shangqing Mystery Realm? Why did he come to the Chaos Sea? Nothing has happened in the depths of the Chaos Sea in the past 200 years. Why did the First Temple Master come personally? Lan Long and Yu Bingxin could not understand and felt that this matter was rather strange. However, now was not the time to be confused and speculate about the First Temple Master's purpose and the intentions of Shangqing Temple. The most important thing now was to find a way to stop the First Temple Master from slaughtering the sea beasts. They were so worried that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. They attacked the three Temple Masters recklessly, only wanting to break through the blockade and suppression to help the thousands of sea beasts. However, the three Palace Masters had long expected this outcome and were mentally prepared. When Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin launched their counterattacks, they also went all out without holding back. They used all kinds of trump cards and ultimate skills, as well as Daoist rhymes and heavenly Daos. Boom boom boom. Rumble. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin's divine abilities collided with the divine abilities of the three Palace Masters, resulting in an even more shocking explosion. The violent and devastating shockwaves pushed the surrounding chaotic fog away temporarily, leaving a blank area. It was a pity that Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin were unable to break free from the entanglement of the three Palace Masters. They could only charge toward the edge of the chaotic fog with great difficulty, getting closer and closer to the sea beasts in the sky. Swish, swish. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the First Hall Master executed his divine ability again. He released a vast and mighty divine power of the heavenly Tao and shot out millions of divine light blades. Over 30 million five-colored blades of light carried the energy of the divine Tao laws and the aura of the Tao as they shot out like a rain of arrows, and they pierced accurately towards the numerous aquatic beasts. Those godly king realm aquatic beasts were constantly being held back by the 6 divine battleships and the 3,000 elite godly kings. They were unable to leave the battlefield. The tragic casualties from before had left them with lingering fear. They were filled with fear and their morale had plummeted. Now they were once again being attacked by a sky full of light blades, and they were still unable to dodge. They could only watch helplessly as their companions exploded into flowers of blood under the stabbing of the 5-colored blades of light. Another series of tragic cries rang out, reverberating endlessly in the world. Over 600 aquatic beasts were killed on the spot by the sword beams. Their muscular bodies were sliced into pieces, and their dark red blood splattered in the Chaos Sea. There were also over 400 aquatic beasts that were severely injured. Some of them had lost limbs, while others had suffered critical injuries. Their combat strength had greatly decreased. The remaining 5,000 aquatic beasts that were lucky enough to survive were filled with fear and trepidation. They cowered and fled into the distance. Although the aquatic beasts in the Chaos Sea had a certain level of hierarchy and status, they were not like the Desolate race. They could not reproduce a splendid and diverse civilization like the Desolate race, nor could they create a complete and detailed hierarchy. At the very least, in terms of discipline and faith, the aquatic beasts were lacking. They could not be compared to the Desolate race. It was the instinct of all living beings to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. It was understandable for the aquatic beasts to flee in all directions when they encountered an unstoppable expert like the First Palace Master. Although the 5,000 aquatic beasts retreated as they fought, unwilling to be entangled with the fleet any longer. However, the 6 divine warships protected the 3,000 elite godly kings as they pursued the godly kings relentlessly, refusing to let them go. The First Palace Master was still leisurely releasing his divine powers and supreme skills. Every move was a killer move that could destroy the world. Often, the sky would be filled with flashes of sword beams, lightning, wind, and fire. Hundreds of aquatic beasts would be sliced into pieces and scattered in the Chaos Sea. Perhaps the divine powers and spells that the First Palace Master used were not that dazzling, but they were simple, unadorned, and extremely lethal. At his level, he no longer pursued the brilliance of divine powers and spells. nor did he pursue pleasing to the eye. He only pursued speed, efficiency, simplicity, and brutality when using divine powers and spells. He did not want to waste any excess energy. As time passed, batch after batch of aquatic beasts were sliced into pieces, dyeing the inky blue sea red. Inside the chaos fog, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were enraged. They roared and cursed furiously. Finally, after paying the price of some light injuries, they finally charged out of the chaos fog and returned to the battlefield. Seeing the first palace master use divine powers and spells again to pursue the fleeing aquatic beasts, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin hurriedly went forward to block and neutralize the attacks with all their might. Boom, boom, boom. The divine powers that they released together clashed with the first palace master's sword beams and saber beams. There was a deafening boom and a destructive shockwave. Swoosh, swoosh. The five-colored divine power shockwave swept across a radius of 50,000 miles. Naturally, it also affected everyone on the battlefield. Of the 3,000 elite godly kings, more than 100 were killed by the shockwave, and more than 300 were severely injured. However, the aquatic beasts that fled in all directions suffered even more casualties. At least 500 aquatic beasts were killed by the shockwave, and hundreds more were severely injured. This level of casualties was actually not much different from the first palace master's pursuit of the aquatic beasts. However, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin had no other choice. Even if they had to kill 800 enemies and lose 1,000 of their own, they had to stop the first palace master and cover the retreat of the aquatic beasts. Unfortunately, this idea was quickly dashed. The third palace master, fourth palace master, and fifth palace master caught up and entangled Lan Long and Yu Bingxin again. The first palace master chased for another 10,000 miles. After killing more than 1,000 aquatic beasts, he turned back and joined forces with the other three palace masters to deal with Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. As a result, the battlefield was split into two. On one side, 6 divine warships and more than 2,000 elite godly kings pursued the aquatic beasts with all their might. On the other side, 4 palace masters joined forces to attack Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Chapter 46:12. The 3 temple masters were already able to suppress Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin. Now the first temple master had joined the battle. One could imagine how difficult and miserable Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin's situation was. Both of them were completely suppressed and could not fight back. They could only retreat continuously. Even so, both of them were constantly injured as they fought back. Their injuries gradually worsened and their combat power decreased. As they fought and retreated, Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin could only pray silently that their reinforcements would arrive soon. In addition, the thousands of sea beasts that fled in all directions had to preserve their strength as much as possible. They could not be annihilated by the Xianxia Temple's fleet. Although there were countless King God Realm sea beasts in the Chaos Sea, Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin had their own territories. Within their territories, there were not many sea beasts that had reached the level of a middle god king and could obey their commands. They also had strong combat power. If the thousands of sea beasts were killed, they would face the dilemma of having no troops to use in the short term. Even if they could gather thousands of sea beasts, they would need to train the sea beasts to form a certain combat power. The 6 divine warships covered more than 2,000 elite king gods as they chased after the thousands of sea beasts that fled in all directions. The sea beasts were most familiar with the terrain and environment of the Chaos Sea. They split into 4 groups and fled in 4 different directions. Moreover, after escaping from the battlefield, they dove into the deep blue sea and rushed to the bottom of the sea. To the people of Xianxia Temple, the Chaos Sea was nothing special. It looked the same no matter how they looked at it. It was just an endless sea. However, to the sea beasts, this area was very different from other areas. At least they knew the special terrain and structure of the seabed very well. They also knew where was suitable for hiding, ambushing, and counterattacking. Just like that, the 6 divine warships and more than 2,700 elite king gods of Xianxia Temple were forced to split into 4 groups. Ji Tianxing's team was made up of more than 500 king gods from the Guardian warship. They were led by the Protector Commander. The team of elders led more than 500 king gods to fight alongside them and chase after the army of sea beasts. Of course, the Guardian battleship and the Elder Legion's battleship followed closely behind, covering everyone's movements. The God King powerhouses of the 2 teams were all pursuing those sea beasts with all their might, chasing after them without any regard for their own safety. Only Ji Tianxing was absent-minded. He pretended to be shouting and charging, but in fact he was observing the situation around him, searching for traces of the main flagship. He had been thinking about the alien god emperor in the main flagship of the Great Hall. He wanted to take this opportunity to investigate. After all, the 4 temple masters had gone to besiege Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. They were 80,000 li away, not far from the huge vortex. Meanwhile, the main palace's flagship was protecting 500 elite god kings as they chased after a group of escaping sea beasts. The first palace master's warship was only 60,000 kilometers away from Ji Tianxing. He could still detect it with his spiritual sense. The 2 armies of sea beasts that were chasing after each other fled in different directions. If they delayed any longer, the distance between them would only increase. If Ji Tianxing missed this short opportunity, he would not have the chance to investigate after the battle ended and the first palace master returned to the warship. After weighing the pros and cons, he decided to take the risk and approach the first palace master's warship to investigate the alien god emperor's true identity. Even if he was discovered, as long as he could confirm the alien god emperor's identity, it was not a big deal even if he had to give up his temporary identity as Su Juechen. However, Ji Tianxing was just about to turn and leave the team in the chaos when a dignified voice rang out in his mind. Su Juechen, what are you doing? The voice that suddenly came from the 3 Mountain Hall's vice hall master. His dignified tone contained a hint of anger. From the start of the battle until now, this seat has seen that you have always been lazy and have no intention of going all out. What are you trying to do? Have you forgotten this seat's words? Don't you want to bring glory to the 3 Mountain Hall? It was obvious that the vice hall master had been watching Ji Tianxing's every move this entire time. That was why he had shouted at him when he showed any signs of abnormality. A cold light flashed through Ji Tianxing's eyes. He was filled with disgust and hatred for the vice hall master. If he had known that the vice hall master would be watching him and had high hopes for him, he would not have performed so brilliantly in the 3 Mountain Hall's elite selection competition. As a result, the vice hall master would be displeased if he did not display the same combat strength as he did back then. If the vice hall master had not been watching his every move, he definitely would have had the chance to investigate the truth and approach the alien god emperor. I miscalculated. Ji Tianxing let out a sigh and helplessly turned around to join the battle, continuing to chase after the sea beasts. Soon another half an hour had passed. The sea beast army had paid another 2,000 lives and finally escaped into the deep sea. Although the 2,000 elite divine kings under the cover of the 6 divine warships were not satisfied and wanted to continue killing, they had no choice. Those sea beasts were too familiar with the terrain under the Chaos Sea. They moved around in the Chaos Sea like fish in water. On the other hand, the pressure on the divine kings of the Xianxia temple increased, and it was difficult for them to move around. If they continued to chase, the Xianxia temple's forces would be scattered. They would not have the upper hand in the Chaos Sea and would be easily attacked and surrounded. Hence, the commanders ordered the troops to retreat. The 6 divine warships covered everyone as they retreated. When everyone gathered near the whirlpool, the commanders counted the number of people. The 6 divine warships were intact. 3,000 elite divine kings and 500 divine king experts were left with 3,100 people. In the previous battle, the Xianxia temple had lost 400 divine king experts, and more than 500 were injured. Overall, the number of casualties was still acceptable. It did not affect the overall combat strength of the Xianxia temple much. After everyone had gathered, the Grand Elder and the Protector Commander ordered the soldiers to return to the divine warships to recuperate. Next, the Grand Elder and the Protector Commander gathered many deputy hall masters and began to count the results. The entire fleet stopped near the whirlpool and patiently waited for the 4 hall masters to return. There was no choice. The 4 hall masters had moved 1,000,000 miles away to chase Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Even if the entire fleet chased with all their might, it was impossible to catch up with the god emperors. Time passed quietly. Half an hour later, the first elder and the senior commander of the guards had calculated the results of the battle after careful calculation. The soldiers worked together and killed a total of 4,800 sea beasts. Only 2,100 sea beasts escaped into the Chaos Sea. Moreover, the 2,100 sea beasts that escaped by luck were mostly injured. Such a glorious result boosted the morale of the Xianxia temple and made them feel proud. Of course, No one could ignore that half of the 4,800 dead sea beasts were killed by the Grand Hall Master. Chapter 46:13. The 3,100 divine kings of the Xianxia divine palace were all immersed in joy and excitement. Even though they had entered the divine worship, many were unwilling to rest and heal. They were still discussing the previous battle. In everyone's opinion, Xianxia Temple had taught the sea beasts a terrible lesson and washed away their past humiliation. This was something worth celebrating. In the past tens of thousands of years, Xianxia Temple had entered the Chaos Sea several times and suffered heavy casualties each time. If not for the fact that the sea beast had the home advantage and were extremely familiar with the Chaos Sea, how could Xianxia Temple have so many divine kings slaughtered by those lowly beasts? The victory of this battle was the moment for Xianxia Temple to stand proud and prove themselves. Xianxia Temple used facts to prove that they had not used their full strength in the past. Once the Lord Hallmaster personally took action, the sea beasts would definitely not be able to fight back. They would definitely be killed. The situation in the Guardian worship was the same. Many divine kings did not return to their rooms to rest. They were all chatting and laughing in the hall. The divine kings of the Three Mountain Hall beside Xianxia were all excited and in high spirits. It was the first time these divine kings entered the Chaos Sea and also the first time they fought against the sea beasts. They originally thought that this battle would bode ill rather than well. They did not expect to win so beautifully. They were all rather proud. When they returned to the Three Mountain City in the future, this would definitely be something to brag about for the rest of their lives. Only Xianxia was silent. He was not interested in the chatter of the crowd. He secretly stared at the movements of the Lord Hallmaster's flagship. When the battle was intense, the foreign race's God Emperor did not even appear. Now that the battle was over, it was even more impossible for the foreign race's God Emperor to appear. The four Hallmasters would return at any time. Xianxia could not get close to the divine worship to investigate. He could only wait for the next opportunity. Not long after, the four Hallmasters returned to the fleet and entered their respective worships. Many divine kings saw clearly that the four Hallmasters returned triumphantly. Other than the fourth and fifth Hallmasters who were slightly injured, the others were safe and sound. As for Lan Long and Yu Bingxin, many divine kings guessed that they must have been killed by the Lord Hallmaster. Even if they were lucky, it would be one dead and one injured as they fled in a sorry state. However, the Great Elder and the commander of the guards had asked a few of the Hallmasters, and only then did they know that the outcome was not what everyone had imagined. Lan Long and Yu Bingxin did indeed run for their lives. In order to escape, they paid a terrible price. Both of them were seriously injured. But were they prepared? He left a backup plan and notified the other ancient lifeforms to come and help. The four Hallmasters chased after Lan Long and Yu Bingxin for over 1,000,000 miles. Later on, they ran into two ancient creatures and brought along 3,000 God King Realm sea beasts. Were those two ancient creatures the same as Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin? Were they the lords of another sea? They were both God Emperor level experts. 4 ancient creatures against 4 Hallmasters? There were also 3,000 divine King Realm sea beasts. In addition, the sea beasts were more familiar with the terrain of the Chaos Sea. The other party did not intend to fight the 4 Hallmasters head-on, but was retreating as they fought. Cover Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin's retreat. If that was the case, no matter how desperately the 4 palace masters attacked, it was impossible for them to keep Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. Other than worsening their injuries, there was no way he could kill them. Even the 4 Hallmasters could not chase too far. Leave the fleet near the whirlpool. What if there were other ancient lifeforms leading an army of sea beasts to launch a sneak attack? Then the Xianxia Temple would suffer heavy casualties. So, the 4 Hallmasters knew when to stop and could only end the battle? They quickly returned to the fleet. After hearing this news, the Great Elder and the Guard Commander expressed their understanding and did not object. But most of the God Kings were filled with regret and disappointment. They felt that this battle was not won beautifully enough. It would be perfect if they could kill Lan Long or Yu Bingxin. The battle was over. The commanders ordered the elite God Kings to return to their rooms to rest and heal their injuries. The 6 divine warships returned to peace. They set off again and continued to rush to the depths of the Chaos Sea. Next, the fleet would sail for more than a month before reaching the deepest part of the Chaos Sea. The most mysterious and dangerous area was the Xianxia Temple's final goal. During this process, The fleet still had to pass through a sea area, which was also the territory of two ancient life forms. Not only the elite god kings, but even the hall masters thought that when the fleet passed through that sea area, they would be attacked again. After all, the sea beasts had a strong sense of territory. They seemed to have a sense of mission. They would protect the Chaos Sea at all costs and not be invaded by other tribes. But to everyone's surprise, in the next month of sailing, the fleet was only harassed a few times. They were all probing attacks. Those that used formations, traps, and various other methods to interfere and attack from a distance did not pose a threat to the fleet. But there were two attacks. It was a joint attack by more than 1,000 God King realm sea beasts. They did obstruct the fleet's progress and delayed them for an hour. The result was indisputable. More than 1,000 sea beasts attacking the fleet was like throwing eggs at a rock. They were digging their own graves. The hall masters did not even need to do anything. With just the 6 divine warships and 3,000 elite god kings, they defeated the sea beasts and made them flee pathetically. Other than these two attacks, the sea beasts did not launch any other decent attacks. Everyone secretly guessed that Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin might have failed in their mission and suffered heavy injuries. They might have sent a message to warn the other ancient life forms. Otherwise, the two ancient life forms in this sea area would definitely not sit back and watch the fleet pass through their territory. The voyage that lasted for 46 days ended. That morning, the fleet of Xianxia Temple finally reached the deepest part of the Chaos Sea and was about to enter their destination. The surface of the Chaos Sea here was completely black. The sea was unfathomably deep. It was more than 100,000 miles deep. Many God Kings' divine senses could not even reach down. Unlike the outer region of the Chaos Sea, it was dead silent here. The sea water seemed to have solidified and did not move at all. There was no wind. There was only a thick fog of chaos and a still black sea surface. There was almost no light here. The sky between the fog and the sea surface was like night. In the ancient legends of the Star of Origin, this was the origin of all things in the world. It was also the mysterious Evernight Sea area. Logically speaking, the origin of all things in the world should be full of vitality. It should make people feel the vigorous aura of life. However, this place was the exact opposite. It only made people feel deathly silent and oppressive, and their hearts were indescribably oppressed. Zhou. The fleet of Xianxia Temple arrived at the center of the Evernight Sea area. They stopped uniformly and hovered above the sea surface. The 3,100 God Kings in the divine warships had finished recuperating and were all ready to go. They were full of energy. The 4 hall masters also flew out of the divine warships. They stood above the sea surface and looked toward the north. Their expressions became serious and complicated. Chapter 46:14. The atmosphere in the Evernight Sea region was too solemn and oppressive. The 6 divine ships were quiet. The 3,100 elite divine kings remained silent. They did not make a single noise. The 4 hall masters stood above the fleet, looking at the northern night and sea, their expressions rather complicated. Their expressions and eyes were somewhat emotional, but also somewhat excited and expectant. After 200 years, we're back again. Yeah. In the past 30,000 years we came here several times. Each time we came full of hope and returned full of disappointment. None of the times were like today, filling us with hope. Heavenly Tao is boundless, heaven's will is ethereal, worldly affairs are like the sea, eternal life is like fog, chaos and confusion, hard to distinguish between reality and illusion. Hearing the few hall masters' emotional sighs, the divine king powerhouses in the 6 divine ships were all confused, their expressions complicated. Many people did not understand what the 4 hall masters were here for. What did the earth-shattering event that they talked about previously mean? But a portion of the divine king powerhouses heard the clues and vaguely guessed the truth. Evernight Sea region? The deepest part of the Chaos Sea? This is the birthplace of the Star of Origin? Lord Hall Master led us here. Could it be to trace the source and explore the Tao of eternal life? It could also be to search for the true intent of heavenly Tao, to explore the truth of eternal life. Too inconceivable. We're actually fortunate enough to participate in such a sacred mission, indeed worthy of being an earth-shattering event. In the past, Lord Hall Master always stayed in the Xianxia mystic realm and never showed his face. This time he took action personally. Could it be that he's confident? This time we have a chance to witness history and a miracle. Many Divine King powerhouses were so excited that their blood was boiling, their entire bodies overflowing with an excited aura. The other Divine Kings were still somewhat dazed, so they asked those excited Divine Kings. After those Divine Kings explained once, most of the Divine Kings only knew the inside story and immediately became excited. The 6 divine warships, which had been silent just a moment ago, immediately became lively. Xianxia also blended in with the many Divine Kings, gathering in the hull of the divine ship, secretly observing the situation around. The discussions and clamor of the people around could not affect him in the slightest. After he observed one round, he memorized the Evernight Sea region and related information in his heart. He had a strong premonition that something earth-shattering was about to happen in this part of the Evernight Sea. Moreover, he didn't just come to the Evernight Sea region today. He would come again in the future, and not just once or twice. After all, the truth of the Heaven Tao, the origin of all things, and the mystery of eternal life were hidden here, and it was the goal he pursued all his life. Sensing the movements in the 6 divine warships, the 4th Hall Master and the 5th Hall Master looked back and wanted to order them to stop. At this moment, the 1st Hall Master said with a calm expression, "Third brother, don't lament about these useless things. Let's find the gate of heavenly Tao first." The 3rd Palace Master quickly nodded and explained, "First Palace Master, although this sea region looks the same, there is almost no difference. But the last few times we've come to the Evernight Sea region, we've always stopped within 50,000 kilometers. There's not much difference. As for the door of heavenly Tao, it should be around 150,000 kilometers to the north." During the previous explorations of the Evernight Sea region, the Grand Hall Master was always in the Xianxia secret realm and didn't come here personally. On the other hand, the 3rd and 4th Palace Masters had participated in almost every operation and were more familiar with the Evernight Sea region. The Grand Hall Master didn't immediately give the order to lead the fleet north to search for the door of heavenly Tao, because he knew that the 3rd Hall Master must have his reasons for stopping the fleet here. If they continued to head north, the 150,000 kilometers around the door of heavenly Tao would definitely be the most dangerous area. As expected, the 4th Hall Master continued, "First Palace Master, let's leave the fleet here. There are too many unknown dangers around the 300,000 kilometers around the door of heavenly Tao. We only need to bring a small number of guards and pass through the previously explored paths to find the door of heavenly Tao." It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the surroundings of the door of heavenly Tao were filled with danger at every step. Within the 300,000 kilometers, there were too many traps, natural killing formations and powerful forces. Not to mention ordinary Divine Kings, even peak Divine Kings would be killed on the spot if they were careless. Even God Emperor level experts ended up with serious injuries after accidentally triggering some traps and formations in the previous 30,000 years of explorations. Leaving the fleet in the safe zone was the wisest choice. Rashly bringing so many Divine Kings into the dangerous zone would be sending them to their deaths. Therefore, the Grand Hall Master nodded and said, "Then let's leave the 6 ships here and maintain vigilance. Call the guards to accompany us." The 3 Palace Masters hurriedly passed down the order and gathered their men. The Grand Elder and the Protector Commander were both peak Divine Kings. They stayed in the fleet and commanded the 6 divine warships and more than 2,000 elite Divine Kings. The 4 Protector Commanders had to lead all the guards and follow the 4 Palace Masters into the dangerous zone. However, when they set off, there were 300 guards who followed them. However, in the previous battle, more than half of the guards were killed or injured. Now, there were only about 100 guards who could still move normally and had a certain amount of combat power. When the 4 Protector Commanders led more than 130 guards to the 4 Palace Masters, the Grand Hall Master frowned. Obviously, to ensure that the 4 Palace Masters passed through the dangerous zone and successfully reached the door of heavenly Tao, this amount of manpower was not enough. There was something that needed to be explained. The reason why the 4 Palace Masters brought along a group of Divine King Realm guards was not that they expected these guards to protect them. Instead, these guards were used as cannon fodder to scout the way and clear the obstacles for the 4 Palace Masters. There were too many hidden dangers in the 300,000 miles around the door of heavenly Tao, and there was no pattern to it. The previous few times when the Xianxia Temple explored the Evernight Sea region and reached the door of heavenly Tao, they had to use human lives to explore a relatively less dangerous path. Although it was difficult to cultivate Divine King experts, it was not a big problem to have some casualties. However, the God Emperor experts could not be harmed. Otherwise, it would not only affect the Shangqing Temple's exploration of the door of heavenly Tao, but it would also weaken the Shangqing Temple's power. Why are there only so few people left? Seeing the Grand Hall Master's displeasure, the third Palace Master asked first. The fourth and fifth Palace Masters could only smile bitterly and explain, "When we set off, there were 300 guards following us. In the previous battle, the Protector Regiment was the first to fight, so the casualties were the highest. How about this? We will temporarily transfer some of the elites from the fleet to form the Protector Regiment." This was the only way at the moment, so the Grand Hall Master had no objections. He nodded and said, "Transfer another 260 guards to form a total of 400 guards." The fourth and fifth Palace Masters nodded to show that they understood. They turned and flew to the fleet to pass on the order. When more than 2,000 elite divine kings received the order and knew that the Grand Hall Master was temporarily recruiting 264 guards, they were instantly excited and emotional. Chapter 46:15. In the eyes of many elite godly kings, it was an absolute honor to be chosen by the Palace Masters to be their guards and follow them on missions. After the order was given, more than 2,000 elite godly kings were filled with excitement and fought to sign up. The fourth Palace Master and the fifth Palace Master were in a dilemma and hesitated on how to deal with it. They only needed 264 people, but now more than 2,000 people had signed up. Time did not allow them to choose carefully. It was even more impossible to hold a competition on the spot and decide on the winner. Therefore, the fourth Palace Master made a prompt decision and told the elite godly kings the truth. "Everyone, don't be agitated. We are not recruiting these 264 guards to follow us through the motions. We are really going to risk our lives and contribute. The 300,000 miles in front of us is the most dangerous area in the Chaos Sea. Every step is filled with danger. Godly kings have a high chance of survival in that area. In the past few missions, there were 400 guards following us. In the end, less than 50 of them could come out alive." Hearing the fourth Palace Master's words, the 2,000 elite godly kings in the few godly warships instantly quieted down. The godly kings who were excited and eager to sign up immediately fell silent. It was true that these elite godly kings were loyal and supported the Shangqing Temple, but they all had a bright future ahead of them. No one wanted to die for nothing. Between life and loyalty, of course, they would prioritize survival. At this moment, the fifth Palace Master said earnestly, "The actual situation has been told to everyone. Please choose carefully. We will not force those who are not willing to sign up. However, we will record everyone who is willing to sign up and give them the most generous treatment. If you can survive this mission, you will be able to stay in the Shangqing mystic realm in the future and serve as guards and other duties for a long time." Hearing the fifth Palace Master's words, some of the elite godly kings' expressions changed. Their hearts were alive again. Although signing up to be the guards of the four Palace Masters, carrying out missions was a high chance of survival. However, would the temple record their names and identities? Even if they died in the mission, the temple would give their families generous compensation. If they were lucky enough to survive, wouldn't they be meritorious? Could they still stay in the Shangqing mystic realm? Serve as guards or other duties? That was the best opportunity to rise rapidly and soar to the sky. Because of this reason, after careful consideration and weighing the pros and cons, one of the elite god kings finally stepped forward. Reporting to the Hall Master, "This subordinate is willing to go." Two elite god kings had left the divine ship. "Fly to the front of the fourth Palace Master and the fifth Palace Master?" His tone was steady and firm. Did someone take the lead? Immediately some people followed suit. One elite god king after another rushed out of the divine ship and flew in front of the two Hall Masters. These people's wills were very firm. They wanted the opportunity to soar into the sky, but they were also prepared to sacrifice and contribute. In just a short while, over 100 elite god kings signed up. At this moment, Ji Tianxing also walked through the crowd and out of the divine warship. Did he come here not just to investigate the identity of the God Emperor? It was also to explore the secrets of the Evernight Sea region. What if he had stayed on the divine ship? Other than waiting here, nothing could be done. Therefore, he had to sign up as a guard and follow the Hall Masters to search for the door of heavenly Tao. This was the only way he could find out the truth as soon as possible. However, he had only taken 2 steps when he was stopped by the Vice Hall Master of the Three Mountain Hall. Stop. The Vice Hall Master had been watching him all this time? Seeing that he was about to leave, he hurriedly stopped him. Zhou Xian, what are you doing? The Vice Hall Master pulled Ji Tianxing, his face dark as he asked in a low voice. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, Of course I'm going to sign up. Is there a problem? Are you crazy? The Vice Hall Master frowned and sent him a message with his divine sense. These guards are clearly going to scout the path and die. Are you tired of living? Even if the Hall Masters give you the best treatment, you have to be alive to enjoy it. If you die, you'll have nothing. The Vice Hall Master's words were the true reflection of the hearts of most elite god kings. In his opinion, Zhou Xian was the greatest dark horse of the Three Mountain Hall, the elite god king with the most potential. No matter how much Zhou Xian wanted to enter the Xianxia secret realm and rise in power, he could not do it this way. This was too risky. He had to stop this. However, Ji Tianxing had already made up his mind. He did not listen to his advice at all. Vice Hall Master, we are all citizens of the Xianxia Divine Hall. When the Hall Masters need us to contribute bravely, how can we shrink back and cherish our lives? I didn't expect you to be such a selfish person. Ji Tianxing did not use his divine sense to send a message. Instead, he said these words directly. The surrounding 100 elite god kings all heard it loud and clear. Instantly, countless people looked at Ji Tianxing and the Vice Hall Master with strange gazes. The Vice Hall Master was dumbfounded. He did not expect Zhou Xian to be so ungrateful and say such righteous words. Zhou Xian. The Vice Hall Master was so angry that his face turned green. He pointed at Ji Tianxing and was about to reprimand him. However, he could only swallow his words. After all, everyone saw that the 2 Hall Masters were still outside the divine worship. If he said his true thoughts, it would undoubtedly be treason and destroy his own future. Some words could only be said in the heart and could never be said out loud. After taking a few deep breaths, the Vice Hall Master finally calmed his anger. He said in a low voice, Zhou Xian, since you insist on going, I won't stop you. I hope you know what to do and come back alive. After saying that, the Vice Hall Master waved his hand dispiritedly and turned to leave. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else. He flew out of the divine worship and into the crowd in front of the 2 Hall Masters. After 15 minutes, no one stepped forward from the 6 divine worships anymore. In the sky in front of the 2 Hall Masters, there were also more than 230 elite god kings gathered. They were still 30 people short of the 264 god kings that the first Hall Master requested. However, the 2 Hall Masters would not wait any longer. They led the 230 people to meet up with the first Hall Master and the rest. The 4 Hall Masters stood in the sky. The 370 elite god kings were mixed together to form a guard team. The 4th Hall Master and the 5th Hall Master explained some things to take note of to the guard team and gave a simple lecture to the new guards. Hence, everyone was ready to set off to explore the Gate of Heavenly Way. However, the 1st Hall Master weighed the pros and cons for a moment and said, Invite the 6th Hall Master over. He must participate in this mission personally. That was right. The reason why the Xianxia Temple made such a big fuss and mobilized so many people was because of the 6th Hall Master's participation. Everyone was full of confidence and expectations for the 6th Hall Master. Chapter 46:16. The 3 words 6th Hall Master made many guards perk up their ears, and their expressions became interesting. In the past few months, everyone had more or less heard that the Xianxia Temple had absorbed a mysterious god emperor of a foreign race. That foreign god emperor wanted to join the Xianxia Temple, so it was only natural that he would become the 6th Hall Master. However, these were all groundless rumors. No one could tell if the truth was true or false. As for the foreign god emperor, he only existed in secret stories and legends, and no one had ever seen him in person. Now the mission had reached the last step and everyone was about to explore the Gate of Heaven. At this time, the 1st Hall Master finally admitted the existence of the 6th Hall Master. Moreover, the 6th Hall Master was going to follow everyone, and everyone would soon see the foreign god emperor. The 370 guards' hearts were in their throats, and they all looked in the direction of the fleet, their eyes full of anticipation. Ji Tianxing, who was hiding in the crowd and trying his best not to be noticed by the Hall Masters, also looked in the direction of the fleet with the same expression as everyone else. In fact, he was now in a very dangerous situation. He was too close to the 4 hallmasters, especially the most dangerous one, the first hallmaster, who was less than 10,000 feet away. Once he made any conspicuous movements, he would immediately be noticed by the first hallmaster. With the first hallmaster's strength and realm, as long as his eyes fell on him, there was a 90% chance that he would see through him. Fortunately, the first hallmaster did not care about the 370 cannon fodder. In his eyes, they were all people who were about to die. At this time, the first hallmaster's mind was full of the gate of heaven and the eternal fire. Following the 4th hallmaster's order, he invited the 6th hallmaster to go with him. Next, Xianxia would face an even more dangerous situation. Of course, this was also the moment he looked forward to the most. As long as the 6th hallmaster showed up, he could confirm the 6th hallmaster's identity, and even if he exposed himself, he would have completed the mission. Of course, it would be best if he could keep a low profile and hide his identity. Under everyone's gaze, the 4th hallmaster entered the 1st hallmaster's ship. After a few minutes, the 4th hallmaster came out of the ship, followed by a black figure. Immediately, everyone's eyes fell on the black figure, sizing it up with curiosity and reverence. It was a figure more than 10 feet tall, wearing a wide black robe and a pitch-black cloak. His face was covered by a bronze mask. The crowd couldn't see his build or his appearance clearly. As he strode across the sky, a black mist of death lingered around his body, emitting a cold and gloomy aura. This mysterious god-emperor of a foreign race was like the god of death from the 9th level of hell, exuding an aura of slaughter and death. It was not just the 370 guards. Even the 2,000 elite god kings on the 6 divine ships stared at the 6th hallmaster with bated breaths. Their expressions were rather mixed. Due to the 6th palace master's mysterious and gloomy aura, many elite god kings feared him more than they respected him. Furthermore, this 6th hallmaster who had yet to publicly take up his position was hiding his identity. He was not open and above board, so many elite god kings did not really accept him. Even if the 1st hallmaster publicly appointed the 6th hallmaster in the future, it would take a long time for the 6th hallmaster to gain the support of the people of Xianxia Temple. This was not only because he was of a foreign race, but also because his character and style were not likable. When the guards and elite god kings saw the 6th hallmaster, these were the thoughts that came to their minds. Xianxia, who was in the crowd, was shocked when he saw the 6th hallmaster's appearance. A cold light flashed in his eyes. It's him. It's really him. Although the 6th hallmaster used the mist of death, the black cloak and the bronze mask to cover his face, his aura was very unique. However, his aura was very special and he couldn't hide it from Xianxia. Xianxia was very sure that he was the Azura God Emperor. After all, Xianxia had fought with the Azura God Emperor's doppelganger in the extraterritorial starry sky. My time and effort was not in vain. I finally found him. These thoughts flashed through Xianxia's mind and he felt very gratified. Now that he had confirmed the Azura God Emperor's identity and whereabouts, he had to carry out his revenge plan. After Xianxia recognized the Azura God Emperor, his expression changed and his heart skipped a beat. But there were many people present and everyone had different thoughts and reactions. So much so that the 4 hallmasters and the Azura God Emperor did not notice Xianxia's abnormality. No one noticed him. In a flash, the Azura God Emperor flew in front of the 4 hallmasters. He bowed slightly to the 4 hallmasters as a greeting. Throughout the whole process he did not make a sound. But the 4 hallmasters had long been used to his nature and did not argue with him. The first hallmaster glanced at the Azura God Emperor, pointed to the Chaos Sea in the north and explained, "Our target is in front. The gate of heavenly Dao is there. 6th hallmaster, do you have any thoughts, abnormalities or any enlightenment at this time?" Previously, when the Azura God Emperor and the Xianxia Temple were in contact, the Xianxia Temple said that they wanted to find a talented and extraordinary foreign race to help the temple complete a certain task. The Azura God Emperor and the Xianxia Temple negotiated many times and gradually found out. The matter mentioned by the Xianxia Temple was related to the gate of heavenly Dao and the mystery of eternal life. Since the Xianxia Temple believed that the Azura God Emperor was likely to be the person they were looking for, the Azura God Emperor beat them at their own game and boasted about himself. Knowing that he came from the distant depths of the starry sky and could cultivate to the God Emperor realm in a weak lower plane world, Everyone was more and more certain that he was the person the temple was looking for. Because of this, the Xianxia temple spent a lot of effort to plan this operation and had high hopes for the Azure God Emperor. At this time, hearing the first hallmaster's question, the other 3 hallmasters and all the guards looked at the Azure God Emperor in unison. Being stared at by the crowd, the Azure God Emperor did not panic at all, and said in a low and majestic voice, "To be honest, since entering the Sea of Chaos, this emperor has been able to feel that there is a force in the unseen world guiding and attracting this emperor. The closer I am to the Evernight Sea, the clearer and stronger this unseen feeling becomes." Hearing these words, the first hallmaster and the other 3 hallmasters looked at each other and smiled with relief, and their hearts were filled with anticipation. It turned out that the 6th hallmaster was the person they were looking for, and there was indeed a connection with the Gate of Heavenly Dao. The Xianxia temple had been planning for tens of thousands of years, and paid countless prices but failed to realize it. Finally, they were going to succeed. At this moment, the 4 hallmasters were a little excited. Ji Tianxing, who was in the crowd, frowned when he heard the Azure God Emperor's words, and a cold smile flashed across his eyes. "Ah, what a shameless liar." Chapter 46:17. The Shura God Emperor spoke and acted out his own words, deceiving the several temple masters of the Xianxia temple into believing him. His words at this time were just habitual acting. But in Ji Tianxing's ears, it was particularly funny. The Gate of Heavenly Dao was hidden in the center of the Evernight Sea. This was a secret he only learned today. And the Gate of Heavenly Dao, as the name implied, must be related to the Heavenly Dao and immortality. It was also the biggest secret of the Star of Origin and even the entire world. The Xianxia temple had paid a huge price to enter the Sea of Chaos several times over the past tens of thousands of years. They came to the Evernight Sea to investigate the Gate of Heavenly Dao. However, from the actions of the Xianxia temple and various clues, the Xianxia temple's several operations had failed. So they summed up a certain experience and believed that only by finding someone related to the Heavenly Dao could they explore the Gate of Heavenly Dao. The Shura God Emperor was the person they thought was related to the Heavenly Dao and could sense it. Ji Tianxing sneered in his heart, but on the surface he was calm and did not show anything unusual. The Xianxia temple did not know the details of the Shura God Emperor, but he knew it clearly. If the Shura God Emperor was the person chosen by the Heavenly Dao, then the God Emperor of Prajna, Dao Xingyun Lu Jiang, and the God of the Underworld were all chosen by the Heavenly Dao. But this was obviously impossible. The one who was really related to the Heavenly Dao and could sense it should be him. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing's heart became more and more expectant. He also wanted to see the Gate of Heavenly Dao as soon as possible to see what the Gate of Heavenly Dao looked like and how it would react. The Shura God Emperor's words filled the 4 temple masters with excitement and anticipation. They didn't waste any more time and impatiently led the 370 guards towards the north. Of course, no matter how excited they were, they did not forget the danger of this area. The route that everyone was moving forward was a relatively safe route that the Xianxia temple had explored several times before. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh swoosh! Everyone flew across the sky in a grandiose manner. Their speed was neither fast nor slow. Their nerves were stretched taut as they maintained vigilance at all times. Flying at the front were naturally more than 100 guards. They were all wearing armor and had taken out their divine weapons and protective gear. The 5 hall masters were in the middle of the group, and the remaining 100 or so guards were at the back, surrounding the hall masters on both sides. As such, the 370 guards formed a circle, protecting the 5 palace masters in the middle. Ji Tianxing wanted to keep a low profile, so he naturally hid at the back of the group. In comparison, being at the back of the group was also the safest. The group had just advanced for 10,000 miles when a problem appeared in front of them. Dense cracks suddenly appeared on the originally calm surface of the chaotic sea. Thousands of black light blades flew out and began to attack everyone. There were even black flames rising from all directions, turning into tens of thousands of black fire pillars. It formed a huge cage trapping everyone within. The chaotic fog above everyone's head was also surging violently, releasing an invisible suppressive force. It enveloped everyone. The few guards at the front of the group were not mentally prepared at all. They had no time to dodge and were instantly killed by hundreds of black light blades. Their bodies were torn into pieces. Pieces of flesh and blood were still flying in the sky. They were burned to ashes by the black flames. In the blink of an eye, 6 guards were killed. They did not even have the chance to scream before they disappeared without a trace. The other guards were all shocked. Their faces all turned pale. Their hearts were palpitating with fear. Their hearts were filled with fear. The guards thought that their recklessness had triggered some kind of trap or array formation. While they were frightened by the death of their companions, they were also very fearful and timid. They were afraid that the hall masters would scold them. However, the hall masters were very calm. They did not panic or get angry because of this, and they did not blame the guards in front of them. Instead, when they saw the guards panicking and full of fear, the hall masters quickly comforted and commanded them. Everyone, don't panic. This is just some array attacks on the periphery. There is nothing to be afraid of. As long as everyone deals with it calmly, we will be safe. The path ahead of us was explored by countless temple guards and people at the cost of their blood and lives. Although this path is relatively safe, it is not absolute. There will still be all kinds of dangers. Everyone must be alert. Everyone, listen to my command. Immediately form the 6-9 return to mystery battle formation and resist the danger together. Hearing the shouts of the 3 hall masters, the hearts of the 300 guards calmed down. Their emotions were much more stable. Everyone obeyed the command and formed the 6-9 return to mystery battle formation. They used all their strength to conjure a huge shield. As a result, the black light blades and fire pillars flying from all directions were blocked by the 5-colored divine light shield. Although the shield could not last for more than a few rounds, it was about to be destroyed by the light blades and fire pillars. However, the 2 hall masters also joined the battle formation. They released vast and mighty divine power and raised the power of the shield by 2 levels. The 1st hall master and the 3rd hall master even personally took out their scepters and divine sabers. They slashed out terrifying divine power light blades and destroyed the fire pillars and black light that filled the sky. Boom, 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 boom. The light blades and fire pillars that filled the sky shattered one after another. They turned into billions of pieces and scattered in the chaos sea. Everyone stayed where they were and persisted for 100 breaths of time. The 2 hall masters neutralized the numerous light blades and fire pillars. During this period, a few unlucky guards were struck by the light blades and fire pillars and turned into ashes on the spot. However, the danger was over. The casualties of the 12 guards were still within an acceptable range. With the experience of this ambush, the surviving guards calmed down a lot and were mentally prepared. Even if they continued to advance, everyone was more cautious than before. Of course, the real reason why the guards were at ease was that the hall masters had put down their airs and would personally take action when they encountered danger. Moreover, with the God Emperor level strength of the hall masters, they could neutralize the attacks and dangers of the Chaos Sea. Next, the team moved forward slowly and constantly encountered wave after wave of attacks. Every attack seemed to have triggered some kind of array formation and power, attracting all kinds of light blades, fire pillars, wind, fire, lightning, and so on. The overwhelming attacks could always drown over 300 people and trap them where they were. They could only resist with all their might. In addition, cracks and whirlpools would appear on the chaos fog and the sea surface, as well as blazing white spatial bombs and so on. All kinds of power formed thousands of attacks, dazzling and impossible to guard against. The team would encounter an attack every 10,000 to 20,000 kilometers. Although the hall masters were able to avert danger with all their might, the number of guards was decreasing. However, the number of guards was constantly decreasing. Every time they were attacked, several people would lose their lives. Just like that, the team gradually approached the gate of Heavenly Dao amidst the constant casualties. An hour later, the team had advanced 150,000 kilometers. At this moment, everyone finally saw a ray of light appear on the pitch-black sea surface in front of them. Chapter 46:18. In the boundless darkness, the sudden appearance of a beam of light in the distance was undoubtedly inspiring. Moreover, everyone knew what that beam of light represented. That was the door of Heavenly Dao, the only source of light in the Evernight Sea region, the origin of the Chaos Sea and the Star of Origin, the only path to eternal life. At this moment, everyone's spirits were lifted, and a strong belief and hope emerged in their hearts. No matter how dangerous the journey to the door of Heavenly Dao was, no matter how many casualties there were, they had to bravely advance without regard for their own safety. Especially the God King Realm Guards, They were powerhouses that could not be underestimated in all the continents on the Star of Origin. But in the Evernight Sea region, they were weak cannon fodder that could lose their lives at any time. There was only one thought in everyone's mind. That was, even if they were to die in the Evernight Sea region today, they had to personally see the door of Heavenly Tao before they died. If they could not see the door of Heavenly Tao with their own eyes, even if they died, they would have endless regrets. Time passed silently and the group continued to advance. Everyone's speed was very slow, and along the way they crossed all kinds of dangers and encountered thousands of attacks, inching forward bit by bit. 50,000 kilometers, 90,000 kilometers, 80,000 kilometers, 70,000 kilometers. The group was getting closer and closer to that beam of light, and the closer they were to the source of light, the darker the surrounding sea and sky became, making one's heart palpitate. The Black Sea under everyone's feet became a pitch-black abyss that could swallow any God-King realm guard at any time. The chaos fog above everyone's head also formed a huge vortex, releasing a terrifying power that wanted to suck everyone in and tear them to pieces. Between the fog and the sea, in the sky that was only 30,000 meters high, there were endless ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire, and lightning. Any light blade, fire pillar, or lightning was comparable to the full power attack of a peak God-King. In this area, only God Emperor realm powerhouses had a chance of surviving. Even if it was a high-level God King once hit by those light blades, they would be severely injured, and in serious cases they would die instantly. And the most interesting thing was that as long as everyone stopped moving or retreated, the sky full of ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire, and lightning would temporarily stop. But as long as one person was still fighting, or even took a step forward, all the formations, traps, and attacks, they would continue to erupt. This made everyone realize that all the formations, traps, and attacks in this area were to prevent living beings from approaching the door of the Heavenly Tao. There were all sorts of sea beasts in the other regions of the Chaos Sea, but there were none here. Did this mean anything? 300,000 miles around the gate of Heavenly Law? It was an absolute forbidden zone. Not only could the desolate race not approach it, the sea beasts couldn't get close either. All living creatures that entered this area would be killed. As time passed, would Ji Tianxing personally participate in the battle? He had never been injured and had always been in a safe place. As the number of guards around him decreased, his understanding of the Evernight Sea region deepened. Of course. Is he still secretly observing the strength and methods of the four palace masters and the Azura God Emperor? Against their combat strength? He also had a clearer understanding of the situation. In the beginning, the Azura God Emperor had to remain mysterious, silently watching the battle, unwilling to make a move. However, the situation became more and more dangerous as the group ventured deeper into the Evernight Sea region. More and more guards died. Even the head palace master personally made a move, casting spells to block and resolve the various dangers. The Azura God Emperor had no choice but to make a move. Ji Tianxing already knew the strength of the four palace masters. In a one-on-one fight, the fourth hall master and the fifth hall master were obviously no match for him. The third palace master's realm was higher than his, but their true combat strength was on par. As for the head palace master, he was at the upper level of the God Emperor. Ji Tianxing was definitely not his match. As for the Azura God Emperor, his strength was currently at the middle level of the God Emperor. He had condensed 4 Dao rhymes and was much stronger than the Pan-Rua God Emperor. Ji Tianxing was confident that he could defeat the Azura God Emperor, but only if it was a one-on-one battle. Therefore, with the 4 palace masters present, he could only bear with it. He prayed silently, hoping that an accident would happen later, separating the 4 palace masters from the Azura God Emperor. When the Azura God Emperor was alone, it would be his chance to take revenge. When the group advanced for another tens of thousands of miles and was only 30,000 miles away from the gate of Heavenly Tao, they had no choice but to temporarily stop. There was no other way. The previous few hours of arduous travel had exhausted too much of everyone's divine power. The 370 guards had suffered heavy casualties. Less than half of them were still alive and only 150 of them could still fight. With such tragic casualties, all the guards were determined to die. They no longer harbored any hope of returning alive. They only had one obsession, and that was to be able to see the gate of Heavenly Tao with their own eyes before they died and witnessed the birth of a miracle. Following the head palace master's command, all the people who were fighting stopped in unison. Thus the scene between heaven and earth instantly froze. Everyone stopped in the sky. The endless ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire and lightning also stopped moving. Space seemed to have frozen and the scene looked very strange. Although everyone had arrived here and could already see the gate of heavenly Tao in front of them. In the depths of the boundless darkness, there was a towering, blazing white gate that was 10,000 feet tall. That gate stood above the pitch-black sea under the dense fog of chaos. It floated in the sky and did not move at all. The design of the gate was very ancient. The white door frame, the golden gate, and the golden gate bloomed with a dark golden halo. Looked both gorgeous and sacred. Before seeing the gate of heavenly Tao, everyone had once fantasized and speculated about what the gate of heavenly Tao was like. Now everyone finally saw the gate of heavenly Tao. Even if it was just a glance from afar, many guards felt gratified and satisfied. Of course, everyone also had a feeling in their hearts, and that was that they were somewhat disappointed. It seemed that gate of heavenly Tao was not as sacred and grand as the legends said. Logically speaking, that was the origin of all things in heaven and earth. The gate of eternal life should be incomparably grand, sacred, and lofty. It should have the majestic domineering aura that encompassed heaven and earth and suppressed all ages. Why did that gate of heavenly Tao, which was 10,000 feet tall, not look very dazzling and not sacred enough? Not only the ordinary guards had this question, Zhou Xian also muttered in his heart. He even suspected that the gate of heavenly Tao could not be fake, right? At this time, the head palace master ordered everyone to stay where they were and consume the divine pills to recover their divine power. Everyone only had 1 day to recover their strength. After 1 day, regardless of whether or not everyone moved, the wind, fire, lightning and light blades that had stopped moving between heaven and earth would continue to attack. This was also the last chance for everyone to rest before reaching the gate of heavenly Tao. Chapter 46:19. A day's time seemed very short at any other time. But in the Evernight Sea region, after a difficult battle and tragic death, it seemed especially precious. Everyone was unwilling to give up this rare rest time. They all circulated their energy and took divine elixirs to recover their strength. Even though Zhou Xian did not consume much divine power, he did not need to rest. But he could not be too conspicuous and attract attention. After all, even the temple masters had consumed a lot of divine power. They were focused on circulating their energy and regulating their breathing. It would be too obvious if he did nothing. So Zhou Xian, like everyone else, stopped and meditated, pretending to recover his power. In a day's time, the entire Evernight Sea region seemed to have stopped. No waves could be seen on the surface of the sea. The sky full of ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire and thunder were also suspended in the air, motionless. More than 100 god kings and the temple masters also stopped in their tracks. Time seemed to have stopped and space seemed to have frozen. The guard commander and grand elder, with 6 divine warships and more than 2,000 elite god kings, stayed at the edge of the Evernight Sea region in a relatively safe area. Everyone knew that the temple masters had led 370 guards to the depths of the Evernight Sea region in search of the gate of heavenly Tao. In the process, everyone was bound to encounter many dangers and accidents. But they could no longer see the temple masters and the guards. Naturally, they did not know what had happened to them and the casualties. When the first palace master left, he ordered everyone to stay where they were and wait so that they could rest and recuperate. But under such circumstances, how could more than 2,000 elite god kings peacefully circulate their energy and regulate their breathing? Countless people were discussing and speculating. What exactly would happen to the palace masters and the numerous guards? No matter how many guards were sacrificed, they only hoped that this mission could be completed smoothly and that the Xianxia temple could create a miracle. The elite god kings only cared about the life and death of the guards and whether the temple masters could successfully explore the secret of immortality. But the guard commander and grand elder were thinking further and further. What they were most worried about now was whether there would be a sea beast expert leading a large army of sea beasts to launch an attack at this time. Before the fleet arrived at the Evernight Sea region, the 2 god emperor-level lords did not lead an army to launch an attack or ambush. However, no one dared to underestimate the enemy. Even more, he did not dare to be so sure. The lords of the sea beast clans were afraid of the battle. Regardless of whether the temple masters and the 370 guards could complete the mission, the protector governor and the great elder only wanted to remain vigilant and take care of the fleet. Otherwise, what if something happened to the fleet? The palace masters would never forgive them. Was it because they were nervous? What was going on? Were they panicking at the slightest breeze and treating every bush and tree like an enemy? The guard commander and the first elder gradually felt that ripples and waves were appearing on the surface of the chaos sea that seemed to be calm. In the depths of their hearts, some apprehension and uneasiness welled up. Although, did they use their divine sense to explore the surrounding waters? Make sure there are no problems. However, the guard commander and great elder were unable to calm down. The anxiety in their hearts was becoming more and more serious. They had a premonition. Something was bound to happen soon. A day passed quickly. After recuperating, the 100 or so guards recovered a portion of their divine power and became spirited again. He was ready. The temple masters also finished their cultivation and ordered everyone to continue moving forward. Thus the team began to move again. The silent light blades, wind, fire, and thunder continued to attack everyone. The team moved forward very slowly. Every few thousand miles, there would be a few guards who were killed on the spot. As the team got closer and closer to the gate of heaven, everyone's hearts were in their mouths. The 100 or so guards saw the gate of heaven clearly, but they could not figure out what the temple masters were doing. Could it be that they wanted to step into the gate of heaven? The Azura God Emperor was still silent. His thoughts and attitude could not be seen. He only patiently cast spells to neutralize the various attacks. On the other hand, the third temple master, the fourth temple master, and the fifth temple master did not forget to cast spells to carefully observe the situation near the gate of heaven while casting spells to block the light blades. In the beginning, Xianxia did not know what they were observing or looking for. When everyone was still thousands of miles away from the gate of heaven, the third temple master, the fourth temple master, and the fifth temple master suddenly saw something clearly. They immediately revealed subtle and excited smiles. That's great. We were right to come this time. As we expected, with the sixth temple master following us, even the eternal fire on the gate of heaven is more dazzling and brighter than before. The eternal fire has been extinguished for so many years. It was only reignited 200 years ago, but it was very weak. Now that the sixth temple master is here, the eternal fire has indeed reacted. Even the flame is much more vigorous. The three temple masters were very happy and excited. After hearing their conversation, Xianxia could not help but raise his eyebrows. He secretly speculated, the eternal fire? There is such a thing near the gate of heaven? He had never heard of the eternal fire, let alone its magical uses. But from the current situation, the eternal fire should be an accessory to the gate of heaven and must not be missing. Another half an hour passed. Everyone paid a terrible price to travel tens of thousands of miles with great difficulty and reach the gate of heaven. Only when they were under the huge door did they feel the holiness and majesty of the gate of heaven. At this time, Xianxia saw the eternal fire that the three temple masters had mentioned. It was a golden divine flame the size of a fist. It was enveloped by a five-colored halo as it floated in the air. If one looked carefully, they would discover that the golden divine flame was not fixed on the gate of heaven. It was suspended in mid-air, drifting motionlessly, but the root of the flame originated from the gate of heaven. Xianxia sensed something. His first reaction was that although the gate of heaven was important, the eternal fire was the most important. As expected, the head palace master ordered everyone to stay where they were and wait for orders to circulate their energy and recuperate. He led the third temple master, the fourth temple master, the fifth temple master, and the Azura God Emperor to look up at the flame on the gate of heaven. The sea was calm and there was no wind in the world. However, the eternal fire on the gate of heavenly Tao fluttered gently as if it was being blown by a breeze. The first temple master turned to the Azura God Emperor and asked in a deep voice, "Sixth temple master, how do you feel now? Is there a connection?" Of course, the Azura God Emperor would not expose himself. He could only bite the bullet and say, "Of course there is. It is as if the heavenly Tao has given me some kind of enlightenment." The first temple master smiled and nodded. "Very good. Then you will do as I say and light up the eternal fire." Chapter 46:20. Ignite the eternal fire? The Azura God Emperor was stunned as if he did not understand what he meant. The Lord Hall Master was in a good mood, thinking that he was about to succeed and might obtain eternal life. Thus he patiently explained, "The gate of heavenly Tao is the origin of the chaos sea and all things in the world, and it is also the only path to eternal life. 100,000 years ago, only that ancestor entered the gate of heavenly Tao and obtained eternal life. But since then no one else in the world has opened the gate of heavenly Tao, and no one has been able to obtain eternal life. The first hallmaster then pointed at the eternal flame on the golden door and introduced, although the 4 great sacred halls have searched for that ancestor in the past tens of thousands of years to obtain the experience of obtaining eternal life, that ancestor has long disappeared without a trace. Even now we haven't been able to see him. After tens of thousands of years of research, we have only confirmed one thing: that eternal fire should be the key to opening the gate of heavenly Tao. But not everyone can ignite the eternal fire and open the gate of heavenly Tao. Only the person we are looking for, the one chosen by heaven, can ignite the eternal fire and open the gate of heavenly Tao again. At this point the Lord Hallmaster stroked his beard and smiled. Since you are the one chosen by heaven, of course only you can ignite the eternal fire and open the gate of heavenly Tao. When the time comes, everyone can try to enter the gate of heavenly Tao and see who can obtain eternal life. Of course, as the one chosen by heaven you have the highest chance. The Azura God Emperor nodded to show that he understood, but he did not make a move. He asked again, "What Lord Hallmaster said just now, was it a revelation from heaven or a speculation? Also, how should I cast a spell to reignite the eternal fire?" The Lord Hallmaster frowned, vaguely feeling that the Azura God Emperor's attitude was not right, as if he was very unwilling to reignite the eternal fire. Thus he continued, "How would I know how to control it? You are the one chosen by heaven, didn't you receive a revelation from heavenly Tao before?" This. The Azura God Emperor was speechless and could not refute. Thus he could only step across the sea and fly toward the gate of heavenly Tao under everyone's expectant gazes. When he arrived in front of the eternity fire, he carefully observed the fist-sized golden divine fire that looked like a flower bud. His eyes were filled with excitement. Eternal fire? A divine flame that existed forever and would never be extinguished? If you can't ignite it, I'll take it away. After refining it, I'll definitely be able to greatly increase my strength. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the Azura God Emperor looked at the blazing white door frame and the 2 dark golden doors. He slowly raised his hands. He formed a divine mudra with both hands and mobilized all the power he had accumulated in his life. He slowly gathered it on his palms and released it toward the eternal fire. The eternal fire was like a golden flower that was about to blossom. The Shura God Emperor had already made up his mind. As long as he poured his divine power into it, even if the eternal flame didn't emit a dazzling light, there would still be some changes. At that time, even if he couldn't meet the first palace master's expectations, he would have an excuse. Just say that his strength and realm are not enough to reignite the eternal flame for the time being. Only when he was strong enough could he ignite the eternal flame and open the door to the heavenly Tao. Swoosh, swoosh. 2 streams of 5-colored divine power gushed out from the Shura God Emperor's palms and quickly covered the eternal fire. However, the eternal fire didn't change at all. It was still in its budding state. Not only did it not light up, but it also didn't ignite the divine flame. There was no change at all. This scene fell into everyone's eyes. Many people began to discuss in private. What's going on? The eternal fire doesn't seem to have changed. Isn't the 6th palace master the chosen one? How can he not ignite the eternal fire? If the eternal fire doesn't change, then the door to the heavenly Tao can't be opened. Wouldn't our trip be in vain? Everyone, don't be anxious. Maybe the 6th palace master is still testing and hasn't used his full strength. The 100 or so surviving guards were all discussing this. Many people began to doubt the Shura God Emperor. Even the palace masters realized that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Thus, the 1st palace master and the 3rd palace master personally taught the Shura God Emperor how to ignite the eternal fire. The Shura God Emperor followed the 2 palace masters' instructions and used 5 different methods to cast spells on the eternal fire. However, the eternal fire didn't change at all. It didn't even react. Only the majestic divine power released by the Shura God Emperor was swallowed up by the heavenly Tao and disappeared without a trace. Seeing this scene, the Shura God Emperor wasn't surprised. He knew very well that he had nothing to do with the chosen one. The 4 palace masters' expressions were a little complicated. They were puzzled, confused, and vigilant. Especially the 1st palace master, who frowned and looked at the Shura God Emperor with a dignified gaze. He asked, "Can you tell us what the heavenly Tao was?" The Shura God Emperor had already thought of an excuse. He answered without hesitation, "The heavenly Tao gave me some scattered images. There was no specific information. I had to figure it out myself. But in the heavenly Tao's heavenly Tao I saw pictures and scenes of the future. Currently this emperor can only comprehend one thing. And that is, this emperor's strength and realm are still not enough. I have to continue to cultivate. When I reach the upper level of the God Emperor, I can ignite the eternal fire and open this door." It should be the first time Emperor God Xiaoluo spoke so much in the past few months. He knew very well that the more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. But in order to cooperate with the Xianxia temple for a long time, and for the stability and development of the temple in the future, he could only give this conclusion. When the hall masters heard this, they immediately frowned and their expressions became strange. "My strength is not enough. I have to reach the upper level of the God Emperor to open the door of the heavenly Tao. Then how long do I have to cultivate? Thousands of years? Tens of thousands of years? It shouldn't be like this. You are the chosen one, the incarnation recognized by the heavenly Tao." Obviously the Xianxia temple had spent so much effort and paid such a high price. How could they accept this result so easily? Deep disappointment and slowly doubt filled the hearts of the palace masters. The first palace master frowned and pondered for a long time without speaking. He was sorting out the bits and pieces of the conversation with the Shura God Emperor in his mind. He also recalled many details. The reason why he did this was because he wanted to distinguish the Shura God Emperor's words, which were true and which were false. To put it simply, he used to trust the Shura God Emperor and had high hopes for him. But from this moment on he began to doubt whether the Shura God Emperor was the chosen one they were looking for. Chapter 46:21. The situation was a little awkward and everyone gradually fell silent. Whether it was the temple masters or the hundreds of surviving guards, they were all in low spirits, full of disappointment and annoyance. Everyone came here full of hope, but after paying such a high price, they had to return empty-handed. Everyone was disappointed and suspicious of the Shura God Emperor. Even if he could still become the sixth temple master after returning to the Xianxia realm, his prestige would be completely gone. At least the people of the Xianxia temple would not easily accept him. Under such circumstances, someone had to find a way to open up the situation and ease the awkwardness. Ji Tianxing was calm and even wanted to laugh. The Shura God Emperor could not ignite the eternal fire, which he had long expected and was sure of. But he was more looking forward to the temple masters and the Shura God Emperor breaking off and even becoming enemies. Only then would the two sides part ways and he would have a chance to seek revenge on the Shura God Emperor. At this time the Shura God Emperor saw that the Lord Temple Master was silent for a long time, so he took the initiative to say, "Lord Temple Master, the facts are very clear, we don't have to waste time here. In my opinion we should leave here first and return to the Xianxia realm to recuperate. When I reach the upper level of the God Emperor, I will come back to the Evernight Sea to ignite the eternal fire and open the door to the heavenly Tao." In fact, the Shura God Emperor himself knew that he was not the chosen one at all. The reason why he lied was to make the Xianxia temple believe him and then ally with him. In the 3 years before, he wandered on the Star of Origin and encountered many dangers. The unknown land was occupied by the Endless Beast clan, and he could not fight with the Beast clan to snatch a territory to live in. Other than the unknown land, the place with more abundant resources was the territory of the Xianxia temple. He was weak and had almost no foothold. However, with the backing of the Xianxia temple and the Xianxia mystery realm as a place to settle down, he would be able to obtain an endless supply of cultivation resources. For many years he could concentrate on improving his strength without taking any risks. The Lord Temple Master had decided to appoint him as the sixth Temple Master, which proved that his plan was half successful. Even though the Xianxia temple's trust in him had weakened. However, he knew very well that igniting the eternal fire and opening the door of the heavenly way were the greatest goals and dreams of the Xianxia temple. For this goal, the Xianxia temple had planned for 30,000 years and sacrificed many elders and countless elite divine kings. Therefore, even if there was a small episode now, Xianxia temple would temporarily tolerate it for the sake of the long-term plan. The Shura God Emperor was 90% sure that the palace masters would not fall out with him because of this. They would still take him back to the Shangqing Palace and let him continue to be the sixth palace master. Moreover, if the Shangqing Temple wanted to open the gate of heavenly Dao as soon as possible, they had to do everything they could to help him improve his strength and reach the upper realm of God Emperor as soon as possible. As expected, the Great Hall Master hesitated for a long time before finally speaking. Sixth Hall Master, although you're very sure that you'll be able to ignite the eternal fire once you reach the upper level of God Emperor, I'm willing to believe you. However, we've gone through so much trouble, expended so much effort, lost so many elite God Kings, and finally made it here. You've tried it so casually a few times and you're going to make everyone return without success. Even if I can understand you, how are you going to explain it to more than 2,000 people? How are you going to let the hundreds of people who have died rest in peace? The Shura God Emperor guessed that the Great Hall Master would not give up so easily, so he asked calmly, "Then the Great Hall Master means?" The Great Hall Master looked at the majestic gate of heavenly Dao and said expressionlessly, "Even if you can't ignite the eternal fire now, you should try to open the gate of heavenly Dao. After all, you're the chosen one. Whether you succeed or not, the gate of heavenly Dao should have some reaction." The Shura God Emperor was suddenly in a dilemma and hesitated. The Great Hall Master's meaning was clear. No matter what, he had to force him to open the gate of heavenly Dao. Even if he was injured or suffered a backlash, he had to test it. The Great Hall Master was so aggressive and imposing. If it had been anyone else, the Shura God Emperor would have refused and become angry. But the situation was stronger than the person, and he had no choice but to bow under the eaves. The Shura God Emperor could only suppress his anger and say calmly, "Great Hall Master, although I know that with my current strength I can't open the gate of heavenly Dao. If I force it open, it will lead to unpredictable consequences. But since you've given the order, how can I refuse even if you want me to die?" On the surface, it sounded like the Shura God Emperor was expressing his respect and obedience to the Great Hall Master. But in reality, everyone could hear the grievance and dissatisfaction in his words. Simply put, the Great Hall Master was forcing him to do something against his will, forcing him to die. If the Great Hall Master cared about dignity and grace, perhaps he would have withdrawn the order and not forced the Shura God Emperor to try. But the Great Hall Master looked at the gate of heavenly Dao expressionlessly and ignored the Shura God Emperor's words. His attitude was firm. No matter what, he would force the Shura God Emperor to try regardless of whether he died or was injured. The other three Great Hall Masters remained silent at the Great Hall Master's request, but in reality they agreed. No one pleaded for the Shura God Emperor. The Shura God Emperor was helpless. After some hesitation, he could only grit his teeth and walk toward the gate of heavenly Dao. He came to a stop 100 feet away from the dark golden gate of heavenly Dao, then slowly raised his palms and pushed at the golden gate with 90% of his strength. Everyone understood that apart from those chosen by the heavens, it was impossible for anyone else to resonate and sense the heavenly Dao. The consequences of tampering with the gate of heavenly Dao were severe. The Great Hall Master had forced the Shura God Emperor to do this because he wanted to test him. First, he wanted to see if he was truly the chosen one. Second, he wanted to see if he was loyal. Boom! In the next moment, the Shura God Emperor unleashed his majestic divine power and slammed into the gate of heavenly Dao. Instantly, the gate of heavenly Dao erupted with a dazzling golden light and a deafening boom that echoed for 100,000 miles. Under everyone's gaze, the majestic gate of heavenly Dao did not budge. As for the divine power that Emperor God Xiaoluo had released, it was reflected back by the gate of heaven Dao twice as much. Moreover, the rebounding divine power was mixed with the supreme divine might of the heavens. This caused the heaven and earth within 100,000 miles to be filled with the supreme divine might that made one's heart palpitate. Not only did the chaos sea, which was as calm as a mirror, surge with towering waves, but even the chaos mist high in the sky was stirred up into a giant vortex. This was the true wrath of the heavens. It was truly destructive. The terrifying power sent the Shura God Emperor flying back 1,000 miles and crashing into the chaos sea. While he was still in midair, blood was gushing out of his 7 orifices and his divine body was covered in cracks. Chapter 46:22. The gate of heavenly Dao was sacred and inviolable. Apart from the incarnation of the heavenly Dao and the chosen one, no one could touch it. Therefore, the Azura God Emperor suffered the most direct and violent backlash. The terrifying power, mixed with the supreme heavenly might, poured into his divine body. Not only were his meridians destroyed and shattered, but even his divine bones and internal organs were dislocated. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices and his entire body was paralyzed. Dense cracks appeared on the surface of his body. Such terrible injuries were no less than what he had suffered when 3 god emperors ganged up on him. That was why he had suffered such injuries. He was paralyzed and could not move. He could not use his divine power for a short period of time. His combat power was also reduced by more than 30%. His aura became very weak. And the people around the Gate of Heavenly Dao were also affected. The backlash from the Gate of Heavenly Dao turned into a terrifying shockwave of divine light that spread in all directions and swept across a radius of 10,000 miles. The temple masters instinctively released their divine power and formed a huge wall in front of everyone to resist the impact. But there were still more than 20 unlucky guards who did not dodge in time and were swallowed by the shockwave. Swoosh! Wherever the golden shockwave swept over, the more than 20 high-level divine king guards melted like snow under the sun, disappearing into thin air. Xianxia had foreseen that when the Azura God Emperor pushed the Gate of Heavenly Dao, he knew that he would be repelled and that there would be a terrifying shockwave. So he quietly took a few steps to the left and moved to a safe place. When the Gate of Heavenly Dao's shockwave came, the wall of light formed by the temple masters happened to block in front of him. He did not have to do anything and was unscathed. With his own strength he was not afraid of the heavenly might at all. The Gate of Heavenly Dao's shockwave could not hurt him. However, he couldn't be too conspicuous among the few guards, so as to avoid being noticed by the palace masters. Now if he didn't do anything and just dodged the calamity muddle-headedly, it would be the most low-key and reliable method. After all, the 4 temple masters' attention was focused on defending against the Gate of Heavenly Dao's shockwave. They did not have the leisure to pay attention to the guards' movements. And all the guards were under the suppression of the supreme heavenly might? They shrunk their necks like quails in fear and despair. Even though he was heavily injured, the Azura God Emperor's mind was still very clear. He was very clear that the head palace master was deliberately testing him to see if he was the one chosen by heaven. Even if he couldn't go against the head hallmaster's orders? Now that he was seriously injured by the backlash from the Gate of Heavenly Dao, he definitely couldn't show it. And so, after flying 1,000 miles away, just as he was about to smash into the surging chaos sea, he used all his strength to stop himself from retreating. Shwa! He stopped abruptly and stood stiffly in the sky. He stood on top of the huge waves. Even if he couldn't move, he would rather stand in the sky and not move. He also could not show his weak side. Even if his 7 orifices were to bleed, he still had to cast the spell with all his might. Clean up the bloodstains. He tried his best to suppress the chaotic divine power. Fortunately, he had been wearing a large black robe, a cloak and a mask. Even if his body was covered with cracks, how could he cover up the fact that he was covered in blood? He was not discovered by anyone. In the eyes of the hall masters and the many guards, he was only sent flying. He looked like he was injured. Other than that, no one knew his exact situation. After a long time, the remaining power of the Heavenly Dao's shock wave gradually dissipated. The guards who were still in shock gradually calmed down. After the 4 hall masters counted the casualties and checked the conditions of the 80 surviving guards, they turned to look at the Azura God Emperor. At this moment, the Azura God Emperor had already silently suppressed his injuries. The numbness all over his body had subsided, and he finally regained his ability to move. He seemed to be safe and sound as he flew back to the field at a leisurely pace. He came to the crowd and stood still. He bowed to the head palace master and said in a low voice, "Head palace master, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The result is as I said." The Azura God Emperor's voice was very low and steady. There were no fluctuations in it, as if he had only suffered some insignificant injuries. The 4 hall masters stared at him, carefully observing his injuries. Including Xianxia in the crowd, he was also silently observing the Azura God Emperor, trying to estimate the severity of his injuries. Everyone here is a God Emperor powerhouse. They all know how terrifying the Heavenly Dao's shock wave was. It is impossible to say that the Azura God Emperor was unscathed. However, no one could be sure of the severity of his injuries. The head palace master was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Sixth hall master, since you have already proven that it is impossible, I will not force you. Now that you have tried and tried, even if you did not succeed, You can at least give everyone an explanation. Let's return to the Xianxia secret realm and recuperate. Sixth Hall Master, you should also work harder and strive to reach the upper realm of the God Emperor as soon as possible. Obviously, the head palace master had tacitly agreed with this result and was ready to lead everyone back. No matter what his true thoughts were, whether he believed the Azura God Emperor or not, he would not say it out loud at this time. He gave the Azura God Emperor some face and did not fall out with him on the spot, still calling him the Sixth Hall Master. This proved that the Azura God Emperor had made the right bet. Hearing the head palace master's order to return, the Azura God Emperor secretly heaved a sigh of relief, and the huge stone hanging in his heart was finally lifted. Today he had muddled through this hurdle. After returning to the Xianxia secret realm, he planned to cultivate in seclusion for a long time and think of ways to improve his strength. This way he could keep a low profile and reduce contact with the people of the Xianxia temple to avoid being seen through. At the same time, it could also make the hall masters trust him more. Of course, when he really reached the upper realm of the God Emperor, he would have nothing to fear and would no longer have to submit to the head palace master. At that time he would leave the Xianxia temple, fly far away and be free on his own. It was not impossible to come back to the Chaos Sea and explore the Eternal Fire and the Gate of Heavenly Dao. But at that time he would definitely not come as the Sixth Hall Master of the Xianxia temple. These thoughts flashed through his mind, and the Azura God Emperor's mouth curled into a sneer. Seeing that the 4 Hall Masters had gathered the 80 surviving guards and were preparing to leave the Gate of Heavenly Dao, Zhi Tianxing was a little hesitant and reluctant, and he kept looking back at the Gate of Heavenly Dao. During this period of time, the Hall Masters and the Azura God Emperor had been talking. He silently stayed in the crowd, but he felt that the Gate of Heavenly Dao and the Eternal Fire seemed to have some strange connection with him. The Chosen One, that the Hall Masters and the Azura God Emperor had talked about, also made him have a lot of fanciful thoughts. Back then, before entering the Star of Origin, he was able to receive the revelation of the Heavenly Dao and had an epiphany. Many people called him the Son of Heavenly Dao, the embodiment of justice. Therefore he could not help but wonder if he was the Chosen One that the various temples were looking for. Chapter 46-23. One couldn't blame Zhi Tianxing for having such thoughts. It was because he had experienced too many things. For example, before he entered the Star of Origin, he would often sense the heavenly axiom and receive certain insights and revelations. Another example was when he led Yunyao, Jiku, and the others to do many things to save the world. Everyone received blessings and divine rewards from the heavenly axiom, but he did not receive any. He had long wondered if there was a special connection between him and the heavenly axiom. He did not dare to imagine that he was the son of the heavenly axiom, an incarnation, and the chosen one. At the very least, he was different from others. Because of this, when everyone was about to leave the door of heavenly axiom, he had the idea of giving it a try. Although he did not know the story and origin of the eternal fire and the door of heavenly axiom. Why did one have to ignite the eternal fire to open the door of heavenly axiom? But he wanted to give it a try. What if he could ignite the eternal fire and open the door of heavenly axiom? Wouldn't that mean that he could enter the door of heavenly axiom and obtain eternal life? Zhi Tianxing wasn't imagining things when he had such thoughts. Instead, he really did sense it. It was as if the door of heavenly axiom was calling out to him, guiding him to ignite the eternal fire and open the door. Zhi Tianxing was not reckless and impulsive. He had considered the consequences. He had also thought that as long as he tried to ignite the eternal fire, regardless of whether he succeeded or not, he would be noticed by the 4 temple masters and the Azura God Emperor. When that happened, his identity would definitely be exposed. With the Lord Temple Master's strength and insight, he would definitely be able to tell that he had possessed the body of the desolate race's God King. In fact, he was the God Emperor of a foreign race. If he failed to ignite the eternal fire, he would most likely be besieged by the Temple Masters and be beaten back to his original form. When that happened, the Azura God Emperor would recognize his identity and incite the Temple Masters to take the opportunity to kill him. After all, he was the foreign race's God Emperor. He had possessed the body of the desolate race's God King and sneaked into the Xianxia temple. He could not ignite the eternal fire and was of no use to the Xianxia temple. Then he would almost certainly die. On the other hand, if he ignited the eternal fire, the outcome would be very different. First of all, the 4 palace masters and the Azura God Emperor would still notice him and expose his true identity. However, once he ignited the eternal flame, he would be able to open the door to the heavenly Tao. At that time, the Shura God Emperor would definitely be shocked and terrified, and would want nothing more than to incite the 4 palace masters to kill him to prevent future troubles. However, the Xianxia temple placed the opening of the gate of heavenly axiom and obtaining immortality as their top priority. There was a great possibility that the 4 temple masters would not kill him. Instead, they would control him or negotiate with him so that he would be used by the Xianxia temple. At that time, the Azura God Emperor's lies would be exposed, and Ji Tianxing would be proven to be the chosen one. In that case, Ji Tianxing could negotiate with the lords of the Xianxia temple and ask them to help him besiege the Shura God Emperor and kill the Shura God Emperor. However, Ji Tianxing's cooperation with the Xianxia temple was undoubtedly like asking a tiger for its skin. It was very dangerous. If he was used by the Xianxia temple, he might be able to obtain immortality and master the mysteries of the heavenly Tao. However, the greater possibility was that after he opened the gate of heavenly Tao, the lords of the Xianxia temple would leisurely enter the gate of heavenly Tao. Ji Tianxing was not sure how the gate of heavenly Tao would allow one to obtain immortality. If, as the chosen one, he wasted his only opportunity to help the palace master obtain immortality, it would be a great loss. In short, Ji Tianxing's action was very dangerous, but it was also a very rare opportunity. The risk was great, but the reward was also very high. Ji Tianxing was about to turn around and leave the team of guards to go to the gate of heavenly Tao to ignite the eternal fire. However, at this moment, the 5th palace master, who was in charge of the rear, suddenly glared at Ji Tianxing and scolded him, "Bastard! Why are you still in a daze?" The palace master and 3rd palace master walked at the front of the team while the 4th palace master and the Azura God Emperor were in the middle, on the left and right sides of the team. The 5th palace master stayed at the back of the team and was in charge of the rear, so naturally he was watching everyone's every move. When Ji Tianxing made a strange move, he detected it and stopped him in time. Luckily, Ji Tianxing's reaction was fast enough and he made a decision in an instant to stop his earlier thoughts and plans. He lowered his head silently and followed the team to fly out, gradually leaving the gate of heavenly Tao. Seeing that he was no longer acting strangely, the 5th palace master didn't take it to heart. He only thought that he was frightened by the divine power and had not regained his senses. Anyway, he was only an 8th stage realm god king. Since he followed the team obediently, the 5th palace master didn't pay any more attention to him. The 4th palace master and the Azura God Emperor in the middle of the team, as well as the 1st palace master and 3rd palace master at the front, all had their own thoughts and didn't have time to pay attention to others. Hence, Ji Tianxing didn't attract the attention of the palace masters and kept a low profile among the crowd. If he had continued to move earlier, the result would be that he would be targeted by the palace masters at the next moment. At that time, before he could activate the eternal fire, he would be caught by the palace masters. What happened after that would be too risky. So Ji Tianxing decided to endure it. Anyway, there was already animosity between the Azura God Emperor and the palace masters. Sooner or later there would be a problem. Moreover, the Azura God Emperor was also injured. Ji Tianxing still put killing the Azura God Emperor as his top priority. Exploring the eternal fire and the gate of heavenly Tao could be put aside for later. Everyone hurried on their journey in silence, flying towards the border of the eternal night sea domain. The journey back was exceptionally easy, unlike the ice blades and frost swords, wind, fire and thunder that filled the sky. Other than some traps and arrays that were activated along the way and there were various attacks occasionally, there wasn't much danger. In the end, the entire team had another 10 guards who accidentally lost their lives while the rest safely returned to the area where the fleet was. However, when everyone arrived at the area where the fleet was, they found that it was empty in front of them. The fog in the sky and the pitch-black sea beneath their feet were both motionless and terrifyingly quiet. There was no sign of the fleet within tens of thousands of miles. The palace masters were stunned on the spot. They frowned in puzzlement and thought to themselves, "What's going on? Where's our fleet? Didn't we ask them to stay here? Why is there no sign of them? Did we remember the wrong location? There's nothing here." Not only were the palace masters stunned, but the 70 surviving guards were also dumbfounded. They looked around and didn't know what to do. The hall masters gathered together and discussed in private through voice transmissions. "Are you sure you didn't remember the wrong location? The fleet stopped here? Could it be that we chose the wrong direction when we came out? It shouldn't be wrong. We've walked that path a few times and are very familiar with it. Something must have happened. But if something happened to the fleet, the Grand Elder and the Guard Commander will definitely send us a message. There's no point in discussing it here. Let's send them a message and tell them about Keek's situation. Chapter 46-24. First they failed to explore the gate of Heavenly Dao and retreated dejectedly. Then they realized that the fleet was gone. The palace masters were in a terrible mood. Their faces were ashen and they were on the verge of bursting into flames. At this time the 70 guards who had been through a lot were silent. All of them were curled up like quails. The Azura God Emperor was also silent. He tried his best to reduce his presence. His injuries were still very serious. He had been silently circulating his energy to suppress his injuries and recover his strength bit by bit. However, he could not show any signs of weakness. To be honest, he was also having a hard time enduring it. He only hoped that he would not be tormented by the palace master again. The 4th and 5th palace masters took out their communication jade slips and sent messages to the Great Elder and the commander of the guards. Unfortunately, they did not receive a response even after waiting for a full 15 minutes. This was too abnormal. No one had any more doubts. They were basically sure that something had happened. Although there were more than 2,000 people left in the 6 divine warships, none of them were powerful God Emperor. This was the Chaos Sea where every step was dangerous and dangerous. It was normal for accidents to happen. However, to be able to make the entire fleet disappear and not even be able to reply to messages, this was definitely an inestimable matter. Who can tell me what happened? The palace master was so angry that his hands trembled. His face was dark red and purple, and his entire body was filled with a terrifying murderous intent. The 3rd and 4th palace masters hurriedly persuaded him to calm down. Only by calming down could they solve the problem. The Azura God Emperor had foresight. He was afraid that the palace master would make arrangements for him again. Thus he took the initiative and made a suggestion. Everyone, the matter should be very serious. It is useless for us to discuss it here. How about this? I and these guards stay here and investigate the surroundings. The 4 palace masters can split up and search for the whereabouts of the fleet. The Chaos Sea is filled with danger. Even if the fleet leaves this place, it will not be too fast. The palace masters are more familiar with the situation here. They will definitely be able to catch up with the fleet. When the time comes, we can contact each other again. Gather. Logically speaking, the Azura God Emperor's suggestion was very reasonable. It was calm and organized. The 4th and 5th palace masters also agreed. However, before the palace master expressed his opinion, they did not dare to nod and agree. Ji Tianxing listened. He almost laughed out loud. He was even more in favor of this suggestion. As long as the 4 palace masters were sent away, the Azura God Emperor and his guards would remain where they were, and he would be able to do whatever he wanted. He had easily killed the Azura God Emperor. Unfortunately, he couldn't express his opinion. Otherwise, he would have strongly agreed to this proposal. Was the 1st palace master a cunning old fox? Moreover, he was suspicious and wary of the Azura God Emperor. Even if he knew, was the Azura God Emperor's suggestion reasonable? It was very feasible. But he still glanced at the Azura God Emperor. Those who stay here not only have to familiarize themselves with the sea, but they are also responsible for contacting us, the Grand Elder and the Protector Commander. It's better for 6th Hall Master to follow me. Let 5th Hall Master stay here. Obviously, the Lord Hall Master was worried that the Shura God Emperor would act alone. He insisted on keeping him by his side to keep an eye on him. The Azura God Emperor was incomparably anxious. He couldn't wait to fall out with the 1st palace master. But, looking at the current situation, he could only swallow his anger. The 1st palace master was suspicious of him and wary of him. He couldn't show the slightest disobedience. Helpless, the Azura God Emperor could only salute and say, "Since the 1st palace master has already decided, I will naturally act according to your orders." He had called himself this emperor before, but now he had changed to subordinate. Seeing him so respectful and obedient, the 1st palace master's expression eased a lot. Then the 1st palace master took the Azura God Emperor and flew south to search for traces of the fleet. The 3rd palace master and the 4th palace master split up and went to the east and west respectively to search for the fleet. The fifth hall master and the 70 guards stayed in place and waited for news while they investigated the surroundings. As for the north, it was the core of the Evernight Sea, the area where the Heavenly Dao Gate was located. They had just returned from there, so there was no need to investigate. Most of the 70 guards were injured and exhausted, so their combat strength was still weak. If they could stay put, they would rather wait for news. But the fifth palace master personally cast a spell to search the surrounding tens of thousands of miles and ordered them to spread out and investigate the situation. Helpless, the 70 guards could only reluctantly start to move. Ji Tianxing's mind became active. He deliberately flew south with a few guards and went further and further away. The fifth palace master was worried about the fleet and had no time to monitor the movements of the guards. Unknowingly, Ji Tianxing had flown close to 50,000 miles. The 3 bodyguards who were with him were no longer willing to fly forward in case they encountered any danger. Moreover, this place was beyond the range of their divine senses. If they got lost in the sea of chaos, it would be difficult to find their way back. The 3 guards were unwilling to move forward, but Ji Tianxing took advantage of their inattention to turn invisible. He remained invisible and concealed his aura as he continued to fly south. The 3 guards investigated one round and found nothing, so they planned to go elsewhere. At this time, they suddenly realized that one of their companions was missing and turned pale with fright. Why is one person missing? Where is that blue-robed guy? Why is he gone? It's over. He disappeared in the blink of an eye. He must have been swallowed by the sea of chaos. This place is indeed dangerous. He didn't even make a sound and disappeared just like that. Quick, quick, quick. Let's go back. We can't stay here for long. The 3 guards were so scared that their faces turned pale. They ran away without looking back to report the situation to the 5th palace master. Ji Tianxing acted alone and flew south. Even if he encountered any danger along the way, it would not hurt him. He flew south not to find a fleet, but to follow the Azure God Emperor and find an opportunity to attack. Although the 1st palace master was by the Azure God Emperor's side and was powerful. But Ji Tianxing believed that he would be able to wait for an opportunity to attack. As expected, he flew south for 50,000 miles and finally saw the Azure God Emperor and the 1st palace master. On the sea tens of thousands of miles in front of him, a monstrous fog turned into a whirlpool, surging and churning, releasing endless devouring power. The sea of chaos below was also surging with huge waves. Thousands of huge whirlpools crashed and tore the huge divine warships apart. There was also a 5-colored divine light that covered the sky. Endless ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire, and thunder covered a radius of 50,000 miles. That area was in chaos. Deafening explosions could be heard constantly, as well as earth-shattering shouts of killing. Countless tall and ferocious figures could be vaguely seen shuttling back and forth in the divine light. 5 divine warships were also shining with dazzling divine light, looming in the sky. There was no doubt that countless sea beasts were besieging the fleet of the Shangqing Temple. Ji Tianxing observed and found that there were only 5 divine warships left. The Guardian warship had long been torn to pieces and scattered in the sea. Chapter 46-25. When the fleet disappeared, the 2 temple masters sent a message, but the Grand Elder and the guard governor did not reply. Ji Tianxing had a premonition that the fleet had been attacked by the army of sea beasts. Only under such circumstances would the fleet disappear and the Grand Elder and the guard governor would be caught in a fierce battle without a chance to reply. The intense battle in the sea area before him also proved this point. The guard battleship was a half-step to Emperor-level divine warship, but it was torn to pieces by the army of sea beasts. One could very well imagine how powerful that army of oceanic beasts that covered the sky and covered the earth was. At least 30,000 divine king realm sea beasts surrounded the remaining 5 divine warships. They continued to attack and kill them. In addition, there were 6 huge figures in the sky above the battlefield, looking down on the battlefield. They spread out and kept attacking the remaining 5 divine warships while overseeing the entire battlefield. The 6 huge figures were all God Emperor realm, and the remarkable skills they used were extremely powerful. It was because of their attacks that the guard battleship was blasted to pieces in such a short period of time. As for the 400 elite god kings in the guard battleship, they were quickly killed by the army of sea beasts after losing the protection of the battleship. The remaining 5 divine warships were still struggling to hold on. They activated all the formations and desperately condensed defensive shields to block all the attacks and attacks. The 2,000 guards in the battleship no longer relied on the protection of the battleship and worked together to release divine power to increase the power of the battleship. The Grand Elder and the Guard Governor were even more busy. They were too tired to command the various battleships and could not free themselves. Even when they received the messages from the two temple masters, they did not have the time to check the contents of the jade slips, let alone reply. The defensive shields and divine power light shields of the 5 divine warships were on the verge of collapse under the attacks of the army of tens of thousands of sea beasts and were covered with cracks and crumbling under the attacks of the 6 God Emperor realm sea beasts. No matter how much the Grand Elder and the Guard Governor commanded and coordinated the overall situation, it was useless. The 2,000 elite God Kings could not stop the siege of the army of sea beasts even if they tried their best to cast spells. At most, the 5 divine warships would not be able to hold on for more than 10 rounds. By then they would be torn to pieces by the army of sea beasts and everyone would be buried at the bottom of the sea. At this time the Grand Hallmaster and the Azura God Emperor appeared. When the two of them arrived above the battlefield and saw the situation clearly, the first Palace Master's anger was finally vented. He roared angrily as he unleashed his ultimate skill with all his might. He unleashed divine technique light blades that blotted out the sky and bombarded the army of sea beasts. Without the protection of the battleships, the King God Realm sea beasts were in great danger. When the sky was filled with divine light blades, the army of sea beasts had nowhere to hide. Blood splattered everywhere and severed limbs flew everywhere. At least 100 sea beasts were killed by the first Palace Master on the spot, not even leaving behind a corpse. Such powerful fighting prowess and lethality shocked the army of sea beasts, and they all turned their attention to the great Palace Master. The 2,000 elite God Kings in the 5 divine ships also noticed the first Hall Master's appearance. Everyone was originally filled with despair, thinking that they would definitely die today and be buried at the bottom of the sea. Suddenly seeing that reinforcements had arrived, everyone's spirits were lifted and they were filled with a strong desire to survive. Since the first Palace Master had returned, then the other Palace Masters must have returned as well. As long as the Palace Masters worked together, they would definitely be able to defeat the army of sea beasts and safely retreat with the fleet. With this thought in mind, the morale of the entire fleet immediately rose by several levels. The morale of the sea beasts was naturally affected, and the momentum of their attack also slowed. Fortunately, the 6 God Emperor realm ancient creatures hurriedly locked onto the first Palace Master and the Azura God Emperor's auras and began to surround and attack them. Otherwise, if the first Palace Master were to attack a few more times, the army of sea beasts would suffer even more tragic casualties. The first Palace Master was just about to unleash a massacre when he was stopped by several God Emperor realm sea beasts. All his divine techniques and spells were neutralized and could not do much. As for the Azura God Emperor, after arriving he did not attack. He was still silently suppressing his injuries and recovering his strength. While the first Palace Master was fighting with several God Emperor realm sea beasts, he was holding a transmission jade slip and unhurriedly informing the other Palace Masters. The first Palace Master glanced at him, clearly dissatisfied with his reaction, but he did not say anything. The sea beast army was too large and too powerful. They truly should have contacted the other Palace Masters as soon as possible. Even if the Azura God Emperor was intentionally slowing down, he could not go overboard or make it too obvious. After 3 breaths of time, several transmission jade slips were sent out and he could only join the battle. 2 God Emperor realm sea beasts rushed over and started attacking him from all sides. The Azura God Emperor was already heavily injured and his strength had dropped sharply. Even if he were to fight alone, he might not be able to win. Now that he was being surrounded by 2 God Emperor realm sea beasts, he was naturally exhausted and forced to retreat again and again. He had almost no strength to fight back. Previously, the first Palace Lord had the intention of monitoring the Azura God Emperor, but now that he was surrounded by 4 God Emperor level sea beasts, he couldn't escape no matter how capable he was. Among the 4 God Emperor level sea beasts, Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin hated him to the bone. As a result, the head Palace Master also suffered a calamity. He was beaten until he continuously retreated, and was suppressed to the point where he was unable to retaliate. Moreover, he began to suffer injuries. As time passed, the 6 God Emperor level sea beasts besieged the Lord Hallmaster and the Azura God Emperor, gradually moving away from the battlefield and into the chaotic fog. Only tens of thousands of sea beasts remained on the battlefield, and they continued to besiege the 5 divine warships. Although the Lord Hallmaster and the Azura God Emperor had attracted the firepower of the 6 God Emperor sea beasts, helping the fleet to take the brunt of the pressure. However, the 5 divine warships were still unable to withstand the attacks of tens of thousands of sea beasts. They would not be able to hold out for long. The 2,000 elite god kings did not stay happy for long. They were once again caught up in the intense battle and anxiety. As they fought, they looked around for the other palace lords. In this situation, only the arrival of the other palace lords could save them from the encirclement of the sea beasts. At the same time, Zhou Xian, who had concealed his aura and remained invisible, quietly left the battlefield and chased after the Azura God Emperor. In the short span of 100 breaths, the 2 God Emperor level sea beasts had already exchanged several dozen blows with the Azura God Emperor. The Azura God Emperor had been dodging and teleporting away, doing his best to avoid a direct confrontation with the 2 sea beasts. He appeared to be extremely cautious and apprehensive. When the 2 sea beasts saw this, their attacks became even more ferocious and aggressive. Zhou Xian hid in the shadows. After observing for 100 breaths, he could tell that the Azura God Emperor's injuries were not light. At present, the Azura God Emperor was retreating in a different direction from the Lord Hallmaster. The 2 sides were only several tens of thousands of li apart. When the distance between the 2 sides increased to several tens of thousands of li, the Lord Hallmaster would have no time to deal with the Azura God Emperor. That would be the best opportunity for Zhou Xian to strike. Chapter 46-26. The Azura God Emperor retreated in a different direction from the Lord Hallmaster because he wanted to avoid the Lord Hallmaster. He could not let the Lord Hallmaster see him being besieged by 2 God Emperor sea beasts and being battered and exhausted. That would expose the fact that he was seriously injured, and the Lord Hallmaster's suspicion of him would be confirmed, which would affect his future cooperation and trust with the Xianxia Temple. The Azura God Emperor thought that everything would be fine as long as he avoided the Lord Hallmaster, but he did not expect that there was a God Emperor powerhouse following him in secret. And an even greater crisis, even life-threatening, was about to come. Time passed quietly. Another quarter of an hour passed. The Azura God Emperor was chased by 2 God Emperor sea beasts and fled to the south for 500,000 miles. The Lord Hallmaster was besieged by 4 God Emperor sea beasts and retreated to the west for more than 300,000 miles. The distance between the 2 sides had increased and they could not see each other's traces. Even divine senses could not detect each other. At this time, the opportunity that Zhou Xian had been waiting for had finally arrived. The 3rd Hallmaster, the 4th Hallmaster and the 5th Hallmaster all received the Azura God Emperor's message Jade slip at the same time. At that time, the 3 Hallmasters were still searching separately in the chaotic sea for traces of the fleet. Suddenly receiving the Azura God Emperor's message, the 3 Hallmasters quickly read the contents of the message and were immediately pleasantly surprised. They had finally found the fleet's trace. Even if the result was as they had guessed and the fleet was besieged by the sea beast army, it did not matter. As long as the fleet held on for a while longer, they would be able to turn defeat into victory when they rushed to support. Therefore, the 3rd Hallmaster and the 4th Hallmaster immediately stopped their search and rushed to the location of the fleet as fast as they could. The 5th Hallmaster's reaction was also very fast, but he still had to gather the guards around him. He waited for nearly a quarter of an hour before all the guards were gathered. At this time he counted the number of people and found that 2 were missing. He immediately frowned. Why are there only 68 people? Where are the other 2? Who can tell me what happened and where did those 2 people go? Although the 5th Palace Master knew that the Primal Chaos Sea was extremely dangerous and that the 2 guards who had disappeared were likely to have met with misfortune, the 5th Palace Master knew that the Primal Chaos Sea was extremely dangerous. However, as the Hall Master, he had to find out the reason why the number of guards under him had decreased. He could not just ignore it. Several guards in the crowd immediately spoke up. There was a guard who was moving with us. I don't know what happened, but he was suddenly swallowed by the Primal Chaos Sea. There was no movement at all. Yes. That area is too dangerous. Our companions didn't even have time to call for help before they were killed. We just asked around. That guard seems to be called Su Juechen. As it turned out, Tianxing's performance was very successful. Even now, the three guards were still in a state of shock and still believed it to be true. The fifth palace master frowned. After confirming that the two missing guards had been swallowed up by the chaos sea, he did not waste any more time. Set off. With a wave of his hand, his entire body erupted with dazzling divine light, enveloping the 68 guards as he rushed towards the fleet as fast as lightning. The first to arrive at the battlefield and see the fleet and the army of tens of thousands of sea beasts were naturally the third palace master and the fourth palace master. Seeing that there were only 5 divine warships left in the fleet and that they were on the verge of collapse under the endless attacks of divine arts, the 2 palace masters' expressions turned gloomy, and their bodies erupted with fury. Damned sea beasts die. No wonder the sea beasts didn't make a single move when we passed by that area of the sea. Turns out that they're so despicable. They actually gathered an army of tens of thousands of sea beasts to ambush our fleet. The situation before them made the 2 palace masters realize that their previous worries were not without reason. There were clearly 2 God Emperor realm overlords in the area closest to the Evernight Sea, but they had never attacked the fleet. The palace masters did not let down their guard and were also on guard against the 2 overlords finding an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Unexpectedly, they had guessed correctly. Moreover, the 2 overlords had joined forces with other God Emperor realm sea beasts to amass an army of 50,000. The fleet's defenses were at their weakest when the palace masters were exploring the heavenly Dao door, and the sea beast army launched a sneak attack. Too despicable. In their fury, the 2 palace masters erupted with all their strength, unleashing all kinds of divine arts and techniques to wipe out the army of tens of thousands of sea beasts. The sea beast army was large in number, and they were able to work together into battle formations to exert their greatest fighting power. However, they did not have a God Emperor realm expert overseeing them, so they could not effectively block the attacks of the 2 palace masters. Boom, 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 bang, bang, bang. As the overwhelming divine light and shadow fell, the countless sword and blade auras were destroyed, and a deafening explosion resounded throughout the universe. A rain of blood erupted from the sea beast army, and countless severed limbs flew into the air. Mournful screams and wails of dying reverberated in the air above the sea. The 2 sides had only exchanged a single blow, but the 2 palace masters had already slaughtered over 100 sea beast warriors. But this was only the beginning. When the elite god kings in the 5 divine ships saw that the 2 hall masters had come to their rescue, they were originally exhausted and demoralized. But now they were invigorated once more. In the sky above the battlefield, the 2 palace masters unleashed all their powers to kill the sea beast army. The pressure on the 5 divine warships was greatly reduced, and they took the opportunity to counterattack. On the surface, the fleet of Shangqing Temple seemed to have the upper hand and was in control of the situation. But in reality there were too many sea beasts. No matter how powerful the 3rd palace master and the 4th palace master were, it was impossible for them to kill all the sea beasts in 2 hours. They could only kill over 100 sea beasts each time they clashed and attacked. The efficiency was too low. After the initial panic, the sea beast army calmed down quickly. They stabilized their formation and attacked the 5 divine warships in an orderly manner. The 2 sides fought fiercely. After another 15 minutes, the Elder Regiment's warship was finally overwhelmed. Under the fierce attacks of the sea beast army, it broke into pieces and fell apart. Without the protection of the warship, the Great Elder and over 400 elite god kings fell into the sea beast army, and they were covered in wounds. After a series of fierce shouts and earth-shattering explosions, the 400 elite god kings were quickly devoured. Only a few pieces of flesh and bones were left and they fell into the chaos sea. Even the Great Elder, who was a peak god king, did not last more than 10 breaths of time. He was besieged by hundreds of sea beasts and his body exploded into pieces. Seeing this, the 3rd palace master and the 4th palace master were so furious that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They let out an earth-shattering roar. But no matter how desperately they attacked, they could not break through the encirclement of the sea beast army and rescue the remaining 3 divine warships. At this moment, the 5th palace master finally arrived with 68 guards. Seeing the tragic scene on the battlefield, the 5th palace master and the guards were stunned. They were shocked and furious,